Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. We thought we knew the Ozarks. Matt swore up and down that Mark Twain National Forest was a hidden gem. Untouched trails, beautiful vistas, perfect for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was always good at selling these kinds of trips, making it seem like a dream adventure. I believed him mostly because I loved him. But even then, as we parked the car at the trailhead and unloaded our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be different. "Looks like we're in for some real wilderness this time," Kyle said, flashing a grin. He was already making jokes about getting lost and being eaten by cryptids. Classic Kyle, always trying to lighten the mood. I laughed it off, but something about the dense trees and the isolation made the joke sit heavy in my chest. The forest felt too quiet, too vast. Matt, as usual, was all business. He was adjusting his pack, double-checking the map on his phone. "We'll follow the GPS for most of the way," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Should be easy, just a couple of tough climbs, but nothing we can't handle." I glanced at Sarah, who was tightening the straps on her hiking boots. She was always the tough one, competitive, never backing down from a challenge. I liked that about her, but sometimes it felt like she had something to prove, especially when Matt was around. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or rivalry. "Let's get moving," Matt called, waving us on. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The first day went as expected. We hiked deeper into the forest, leaving behind the marked trails and venturing into the heart of the wilderness. The trees were taller here, their branches heavy with green, creating a canopy that let in only slivers of sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, but Matt pressed on, oblivious to the creeping unease that gnawed at me. That night, we set up camp by a small stream. The air was cooler than I expected, a bite of cold that sank into my bones as the sun set. Kyle's tent had a broken pole, something he hadn't noticed until we tried setting it up. He laughed it off, saying he'd just sleep in Sarah's tent, but Matt's frustration was clear. "Next time, check your gear before we leave," Matt snapped, his voice tight. "Relax, man, it's just a tent pole," Kyle said, but the tension between them simmered. I was too tired to deal with their bickering, so I busied myself with starting the fire. Dana, my girlfriend, snapped photos as always, capturing the last glimmers of daylight filtered through the trees. She looked peaceful behind the camera, but I could tell she felt it too. That sense that something was off. That night, we heard the first howl. It was distant at first, almost like the wind moving through the trees. But then it came again, low and deep, rising into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet strapped to her pack. Matt shrugged, trying to play it off. "Probably just a coyote or something. These woods are full of wildlife," but it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard. I exchanged a glance with Dana, and she raised her eyebrows in that way she did when she didn't believe something. Kyle, of course, just took the opportunity to joke. "Sounds like Bigfoot's out there, or maybe the Ozark Howler," he said, his voice teasing. "You guys know that one, right? Big hairy creature, glowing red eyes, hunts hikers for fun." "Knock it off," Matt said sharply. "It's just an animal. Get some sleep. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I tried to brush it off too, but lying in our tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was restless sleep. The next morning, Dana told me she'd seen something outside the tent, just for a second, but she was sure of it. Red eyes. "I saw red eyes, Matt," she said softly. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have been half asleep. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, though even I didn't believe it. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams I'd had, the sensation of being watched, hunted, like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. Day 2 was worse. The forest grew denser, the path less defined, and the GPS signal flickered in and out. At one point, we lost it completely. Matt insisted he could still navigate using the map, but the landscape wasn't matching up with anything. The trees felt wrong, closer somehow, like they were moving in on us. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed down like a weight. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly, glaring at Matt. "We're not lost," he snapped back. "I know where we are." But he didn't. None of us did. That night we found claw marks on the trees, deep gouges like something had raked through the bark with claws far larger than any animal should have. Dana's hands trembled as she took pictures, but Matt dismissed it. "Could be a bear," he said, though the unease in his voice was obvious. "That's not a bear," Kyle muttered, his earlier joking tone gone. He stared at the claw marks, his face pale. "This is messed up, man. Maybe we should turn back." "We're not turning back," Matt said, his voice rising. "We've come this far. We stick to the plan." The argument that followed was inevitable. Sarah sided with Kyle, saying we were unprepared and it wasn't worth the risk. Dana stayed quiet, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Matt, stubborn as ever, refused to admit we were in over our heads. We set up camp again that night, and the howling returned. This time it was closer, louder, the sound reverberating through the trees like something was circling us. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of those red eyes watching us from the darkness. In the morning we found more signs. Animal carcasses torn apart, strewn across the ground. Deer, mostly, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't make sense. No predator would kill like that, not for food. It was like something had ripped them apart for fun. Kyle was the first to voice what we were all thinking. "It's the howler, man. I'm telling you, this place is messed up." Matt, as always, refused to believe it. "It's just a predator, wolves maybe." "There are no wolves in the Ozarks," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Not anymore." We kept moving, but the howls followed us, louder, closer. By late afternoon, we knew we weren't alone. We were being hunted. It was just before dusk when we saw it. We stopped to rest, setting our packs down near a small clearing. That's when Dana froze, her camera slipping from her hands. "Matt," she whispered, "behind you." I turned just in time to see it step out of the trees, hulking, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that burned through the dim light. Its body was massive, covered in thick dark fur, but its shape was wrong. Twisted, like something caught between animal and something more. The howl that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard. A deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. It didn't charge, it didn't attack. It just stood there, watching, as if daring us to move. We didn't. "What the hell is that?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, his face drained of color. "It's not real," Matt muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling now. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, its red eyes glowing brighter. Then, with one last bone-chilling howl, it slipped back into the trees. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We packed up in record time and started moving fast. Too fast. The light was fading, and we were stumbling over roots and rocks, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That night, we didn't set up camp. We just kept walking, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. The howls continued. Closer, always closer. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. Its roof caved in, the windows shattered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We collapsed inside, too exhausted to keep going. For the first time in hours, the howling stopped. Matt stared at the floor, his face pale, his hands shaking. "It's not real," he whispered over and over again, like a broken record. But we knew better. We had heard it, seen it. The Ozark howler was real, and it had let us live, for now. As we sat in that ruined cabin, the forest watching, waiting, I realized we hadn't escaped. Not really. The howler was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. My name is Logan Hayes, and back in 2023, I decided to take my RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. Being a freelance photographer had its perks. I could work anywhere, and I had a penchant for capturing untouched landscapes. I thought a solo trip would not only boost my portfolio, but also give me a much-needed break from city life. I'd been on the road for a few days, enjoying the serene beauty of the mountains and the crisp, clean air. The park was less crowded than usual, which was perfect for someone like me who enjoyed solitude. I set up camp near a quiet spot overlooking a glacier lake. The view was postcard perfect, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought that my friends were stuck in cubicles while I had this paradise all to myself. Guess the early bird really does get the worm, or in this case, the perfect shot, I mused to myself. After a day of hiking and snapping photos, I returned to my RV to find a note pinned to the door. It read, "Beautiful place, isn't it? Be careful out here." No signature, nothing else. I glanced around but saw no one. It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably some local's way of being friendly, or maybe trying to spook the tourists. Either way, I wasn't going to let it ruin my mood. The next morning, I headed to a nearby trail recommended by a ranger I had chatted with earlier. "You'll find some rare wildlife if you're lucky," he'd said. As I trekked deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around me. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves provided a soothing soundtrack, and I felt at ease. About an hour into the hike, I came across an old, weathered cabin. It wasn't on any map I had, and I hadn't heard anyone mention it. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached the cabin, noticing that the door was slightly ajar. Probably abandoned, I thought. Still, I knocked. No answer. I pushed the door gently, and it creaked open. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with various trinkets, old lanterns, fishing gear, and dusty furniture. On a table lay a collection of photographs. I picked one up and felt a chill run down my spine. It was a picture of me setting up my RV. Another showed me hiking earlier that day. "This can't be," I whispered, my mind racing. Someone had been watching me, documenting my every move. I heard footsteps outside. Panicking, I quickly placed the photo back and hid behind a large cabinet. The door swung open and a man walked in, humming an off-key tune. He was tall, with unkempt hair, wearing a worn-out flannel shirt. He carried a hunting knife on his belt and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Got some good shots today," he mumbled to himself, laying down a camera on the table. My camera. I instinctively felt for my backpack. It was gone. How had he taken it without me noticing? My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He started flipping through the photos on the camera, chuckling. "You have a good eye," he said aloud as if speaking to me directly. "Shame you'll be leaving so soon." I needed to get out of there. Slowly, I inched toward the back door, keeping my eyes on him. Just as I reached for the doorknob, it squeaked. He turned abruptly. "Who's there?" he demanded, his jovial demeanor vanishing. Thinking quickly, I said, "Just a lost hiker." Didn't mean to intrude. I stepped out from behind the cabinet, hands raised. He eyed me suspiciously. "Lost, huh? These woods aren't safe for people who don't know their way." I forced a laugh. "Tell me about it. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere." He glanced at the camera and then back at me. "You take good pictures." "Thanks," I replied cautiously. "I actually came looking for wildlife to photograph." "Wildlife, you say?" He smirked. "Sometimes the most dangerous creatures aren't animals." I swallowed hard. Well, I should probably get going before it gets dark. He blocked the doorway. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that." My mind raced for a way out. "Why is that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tapped the knife on his belt. "You see, folks around here don't take kindly to trespassers." I needed to distract him. "I didn't see any no trespassing signs. Maybe I can make it up to you. I have some supplies back at my RV, food, even some good coffee." He seemed to consider this. "Coffee, huh? Been a while since I had a decent cup." "Absolutely," I said, seizing the opportunity. "Let's head over, and I'll brew you the best cup you've had in years." He nodded slowly. "All right, but no funny business." "Of course not," I assured him. We walked back toward my campsite. I tried to keep the conversation light. "So, do you live out here all alone?" He glanced at me. "Been out here for years. The forest provides everything I need." "Must be peaceful," I commented. He chuckled. "You'd be surprised." We arrived at my RV, and I gestured for him to take a seat outside. "I'll just grab the coffee from inside." He stood by the door. "I'll come with you." "Sure," I said, trying to hide my unease. Inside the RV, I began preparing the coffee, all the while plotting my escape. If I could just get him to lower his guard. "Mind if I use the restroom?" he asked. "Go ahead," I replied, pointing him in the right direction. As soon as he was out of sight, I grabbed my keys and quietly opened the driver's side door. Just as I was about to start the engine, he appeared in the doorway, eyes wild. "Going somewhere?" he snarled. I didn't answer. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He lunged at me, but I hit the gas, causing him to stumble backward. The RV sped down the makeshift path, bouncing over rocks and roots. A loud bang echoed through the air. My side mirror shattered. He was shooting at me. This guy really doesn't want me to leave, I muttered. Spotting a narrow trail to the left, I took a chance. The RV barely fit between the trees, branches scraping against the sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. Finally, the dense forest began to thin. I burst onto a paved road. I didn't stop until I reached a ranger station several miles away. I stumbled inside, out of breath. "There's a man out there. He attacked me," I managed to say. The rangers exchanged glances. "Calm down and tell us what happened," one of them said. I recounted the events, and they listened intently. When I mentioned the cabin, one of the rangers frowned. "There's no cabin out there, at least none that's supposed to be occupied." Another ranger chimed in. "We've had reports of missing hikers in that area." They immediately dispatched a team to investigate. I insisted on going with them to point out the location. As we arrived, the cabin looked eerily quiet. The door was closed, no signs of life. The rangers approached cautiously, weapons drawn. They signaled for me to stay back. After a few tense minutes, they emerged. "Place is empty," one of them said, "but you need to see this." Inside, the cabin had been cleared out. No photos, no belongings, nothing. It was as if no one had ever lived there. "He was here," I insisted. "He had photos of me, of others." One of the rangers found a hidden trapdoor beneath a rug. Opening it revealed a cellar filled with personal items, backpacks, clothing, cameras, all belonging to different people. "This doesn't look good," a ranger muttered. They continued to search and found a map marked with various locations around the park. "These are campsites," I pointed out. "He might be targeting more people." The rangers called for backup and began collecting evidence. As we exited the cabin, a chilling thought struck me. "He knew you'd come," I said. "That's why he left." "Don't worry," a ranger assured me. "We'll find him." Over the next few days, the park was closed as authorities conducted a thorough search. They discovered more hidden spots, a network of cabins and tunnels. It became clear that the man had been operating in the area for years, preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers. The news reported on the Glacier Park Predator, warning people to stay vigilant. They found several bodies in shallow graves, bringing a grim end to the search for some missing persons. I was asked to give a statement and help identify the items found. It was a sobering experience, realizing how close I came to becoming another statistic. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave the area for good, a detective approached me. "We found something you might want to see, he said. He handed me a photograph, a picture of the man, much younger, standing with a group of park rangers. "His name is Thomas Hale," the detective explained, "former ranger who went off the grid after being suspected of misconduct." "Why wasn't he caught before?" I asked. "He was clever, knew the land better than anyone," the detective replied. "Used his knowledge to avoid capture." I nodded, absorbing the information. "So what's next?" "We'll keep searching, but with the terrain and his skills, it won't be easy." I left Montana the next day, the events weighing heavily on my mind. As I crossed state lines, I couldn't help but think of the others who weren't as lucky. The experience had been harrowing, but I was grateful to have made it out alive. Several months later, I received a call from the detective. "We got him," he said simply. "That's a relief," I replied. "He was found trying to set up another cabin in a different park." The detective continued. "He's in custody now." "Good to hear," I said, feeling a sense of closure. The whole ordeal had been surreal, like something out of a thriller novel. But it was real, and it was over. As for Thomas Hale, he was charged with multiple counts, and the evidence was overwhelming. The families of the victims finally got some answers, though it could never bring their loved ones back. I returned to my photography, choosing subjects a bit closer to civilization. After all, as much as I loved the solitude of nature, I figured there was something to be said for the safety of crowds. And maybe, just maybe, the best shots were the ones that didn't come with a side of danger. My name's Alexander Knight, and in 2022, I thought a solo RV camping trip through the remote corners of Wrangell-St. Elias National Park in Alaska would be the perfect way to unplug. Not that I was fleeing the world or anything, it's just that a man needs to unwind. I'd been grinding through 60-hour work weeks as a mechanic in Anchorage, and every time I touched an engine, I could practically hear it snickering, knowing it'd give me hell soon enough. So when I saved enough for a week off, I packed my RV, bought enough canned chili to last me through a nuclear winter, and hit the open road. I didn't have much planned, just me, nature, and if I was lucky, the quiet. Wrangell-St. Elias is as wild as it gets, even in Alaska. The roads are mostly gravel, so you're bumping along for miles with no cell reception, no gas stations, just miles of towering peaks and forests dense enough to swallow you whole. I arrived at the spot I had scouted online, some barely marked pull-off by a river with a breathtaking view of Mount Blackburn. I parked, popped open a can of chili, and had a laugh about how the only bears I'd seen so far were on the labels of the canned goods. The night crept in fast, and it was colder than I expected. I bundled up, threw on some music, and went to sleep early, figuring I'd hit the trails in the morning. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound, a sort of scraping against the side of my RV. I sat up and listened, chalking it up to the wind or maybe some branches, but it didn't let up. I'll admit I don't scare easy, but out here, any sound at night is enough to make your heart race a little faster. I cracked the window to peek out. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the trees, and I could make out something moving by the rear of the RV. My mind went straight to bear, Benet, so I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the back window, hoping to catch a glimpse and maybe scare it off. What I saw wasn't a bear. It was a man, dirty, ragged, and gripping some kind of jagged metal tool. He had his back turned, but I could see he was scratching something into the metal. "Hey!" I shouted, more out of reflex than bravery. The man froze, then turned slowly toward me. He had a wiry build, his hair matted to his head and his face. Let's just say he didn't look like someone I wanted to meet in a dark alley, let alone miles away from any civilization. He gave me this twisted smile, then raised the metal tool, showing it off like he was proud of it. It looked like some kind of homemade weapon, a rusty piece of metal wrapped with fabric for a handle. I didn't wait around. I locked the RV doors, turned off the lights, and dialed 911, even though I knew I wouldn't get a signal. The guy kept scraping at the RV, circling it like a shark around a dinghy. I started thinking maybe he was just trying to scare me, but I didn't plan to stick around to find out. I grabbed my keys, started the engine, and floored it. The tires spun for a second on the gravel, and he stepped back, laughing as I peeled away. I could see him in my mirror, just standing there, his shoulders bouncing with laughter as I sped off. My first thought was to drive all the way back to Anchorage, but I was low on gas and couldn't risk getting stranded halfway there. I kept driving until I found a narrow side road that led up a hill. I pulled off and killed the engine. I figured if I parked with the lights off, he'd have a harder time finding me. I sat in the driver's seat, my eyes darting to every shadow, my ears straining for any sound. An hour passed, maybe more, and just when I started thinking I had lost him, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate steps crunching the gravel just outside the RV. My stomach dropped. I felt like a trapped animal. I knew if I tried to drive again, he'd just follow me. My best shot was to wait him out, hope he'd get bored and leave. Then I heard him talking. It was low, almost a mumble, but I could make out the words. "Brian. Come on out, Brian. You can't hide from me forever." My blood turned cold. How the hell did he know my name? I hadn't said anything, hadn't left any ID out. So unless he'd seen something inside my RV earlier, there was no way he could know. The footsteps circled around, and then I heard something metal sliding against the door. He was trying to pry it open. My hands were shaking, but I looked around for something, anything, to defend myself with. I found a tire iron under the seat and gripped it tight, praying he'd give up. The door creaked as he wedged the metal tool into the crack, forcing it open inch by inch. I don't know what came over me, but as soon as the door opened, I swung the tire iron as hard as I could. It connected with a sickening thud, and he staggered back, clutching his head. He looked up at me, blood running down his face, but he didn't look angry. If anything, he looked amused, like I just made this more fun for him. "Good swing," he said, his voice low and raspy. "But you're not getting out of here alive, Brian." I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I jumped out of the RV and ran toward the trees, figuring I'd have a better shot hiding in the forest than trapped in a vehicle. I ran until my lungs burned, ducking behind trees and bushes, trying to stay low and quiet. I could hear him crashing through the woods behind me, laughing like this was some twisted game. I found a small ravine and slid down into it, crouching low and holding my breath. The footsteps stopped above me, and I saw his shadow through the branches. He was scanning the area, his head swiveling like a predator tracking its prey. He stayed there for what felt like hours, muttering to himself, talking about how he was going to carve his mark and how no one would ever find me. Eventually he moved on, his footsteps fading into the distance. I stayed put, too afraid to move until the first light of dawn broke through the trees. I crawled out of the ravine, scraped and bruised, and made my way back to the RV. It was wrecked. He'd scratched symbols and words all over the side, the kind of stuff you'd expect to see in some horror movie. Half-finished phrases about judgment and the reckoning. There were dents in the metal where he'd tried to pry his way back in, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. I gathered what I could, anything useful, and started walking back down the road. It took me most of the day, but I finally reached a ranger station. They didn't believe me at first, thought I'd made it up or maybe had some kind of mental break. But when they sent someone out to check the RV, they found everything just as I described. They launched a search for the guy, but they didn't find a trace. No footprints, no signs of campfires, nothing. The Rangers pulled up some old records and found out that about a decade ago, there had been reports of a man terrorizing campers in the area, scratching up their vehicles and leaving strange messages. They never caught him, and after a while, people thought he must have moved on or died out in the wilderness. But clearly he hadn't. After that, I never went camping alone again. As for the guy, they never found him. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed. A break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint sound, almost too soft to notice. A rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft, rhythmic pulse like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while, I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night, but every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds. It could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here. Something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. Once you hear it, it doesn't stop. That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out, as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker, or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old, faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal, it was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint, but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there. Always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. My name is William Lewis, and in 2016, I took my RV up to Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota for a bit of peace and quiet. Being cooped up in an office staring at code all day can make a guy crave some real-world bugs. You know, the kind that don't crash your system but buzz around your head. I'd been feeling the weight of deadlines and endless meetings, so a solo trip sounded like the perfect antidote. I packed my fishing gear, loaded up on supplies, and hit the road. The idea was to disconnect from emails and reconnect with nature. Maybe even catch a fish big enough that I wouldn't have to exaggerate its size later. The drive was long but therapeutic. Trees replaced skyscrapers and the air became crisp and pine-scented. By the time I reached the park entrance, the sun was dipping low, casting golden hues over the vast expanse of lakes and forests. I found a secluded spot by a lake, parked the RV, and set up camp. The silence was comforting, a natural lullaby I hadn't heard in years. The first couple of days were bliss. I hiked the trails, fished, caught nothing, but that's between us, and even tried my hand at photographing wildlife. It was on the third day that things took an odd turn. I was sitting by the campfire, attempting to roast marshmallows without setting them ablaze, a skill I clearly hadn't mastered, when I noticed a light flickering deeper in the woods. It was faint, but definitely there. I figured I wasn't alone out here, which was odd given the remoteness of my location. Maybe another camper had the same idea of escaping the grind. Curiosity piqued, I decided to check it out. Grabbing my flashlight and pocket knife, because that's what every horror movie tells you to do. Right, I ventured into the trees. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual sounds of the forest were muted, as if the wildlife had decided this was a good time for a coffee break. After about 10 minutes, I came upon a small clearing. In the center stood a makeshift cabin, more of a shack, really, cobbled together with old timber and sheet metal. The light was coming from inside. I thought about calling out, but decided against it. Instead, I moved closer, trying to be as quiet as a guy in hiking boots can be. Peering through a gap in the wooden panels, I saw a man hunched over a table, meticulously arranging various items. At first glance, it looked like he was sorting tools, but then I noticed something that made my stomach churn. Laid out on the table were wallets, watches, and even a few passports, personal items that didn't belong in a place like this. A floorboard creaked under my weight, and the man snapped his head toward the wall. Panic surged through me, and I ducked behind a tree. After a few tense moments, I heard the door swing open. "Who's out there?" A gruff voice called. "I know someone's there." I held my breath, hoping he'd dismiss the noise as a raccoon or the wind. Instead, I heard footsteps crunching leaves, getting closer. It was then I realized that my little escapade had turned into something far more sinister. Deciding that retreat was the better part of valor, a fancy way of saying I was ready to bolt, I began to backtrack quietly. But fate, having a twisted sense of humor, had other plans. My foot snagged on a root and I went down hard, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering against a rock. "Over here," the man shouted, now sounding alarmingly close. Scrambling to my feet, I abandoned any pretense of stealth and ran. Branches whipped against my face and the underbrush clawed at my legs. Behind me, I could hear him pursuing, his heavy footsteps matching my frantic pace. Bursting through the trees, I spotted the faint glow of my campfire embers ahead. If I could just reach the RV, I might have a chance. I dashed toward it, lungs burning, every muscle urging me forward. I reached the RV and yanked the door open, slamming it shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it, but I knew a locked door wouldn't stop someone determined. Fumbling, I searched for my keys to start the engine. A loud thud echoed from the side of the RV, followed by the man's voice. "You can't hide in there forever." "Watch me," I yelled back, immediately regretting giving away my exact position. The engine roared to life. Thankfully, the old girl didn't pick now to have a mechanical issue. Throwing the RV into gear, I hit the gas. The vehicle lurched forward, knocking over my neatly arranged campsite. In the side mirror, I caught a glimpse of the man. He stood there, illuminated by the RV's taillights, an expression of cold fury on his face. Just when I thought I was putting distance between us, a shot rang out. The back window shattered, glass spraying the interior. I ducked instinctively, the RV swerving dangerously on the narrow path. So much for a peaceful retreat. I kept driving, maneuvering the RV through the dark forest road, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers. Another shot hit the side mirror, obliterating it. Whoever this guy was, he was serious. As I reached the main road, I didn't dare slow down. It wasn't until I saw the distant lights of a gas station that I began to feel a sliver of hope. Pulling in recklessly, I honked the horn repeatedly. A startled attendant stepped out, confusion plastered on his face. "Call the police," I shouted, jumping out of the RV. He hesitated, but then saw the state I was in. Disheveled, bleeding from cuts, eyes wide with terror, and pulled out his phone. Minutes later, the place was swarming with law enforcement. I gave my statement as best as I could, my words tumbling over each other. They dispatched units to search the area, but as dawn broke, there was no sign of the man or his shack. Weeks went by, and I was contacted by a detective handling the case. They had found the shack, but it was empty, cleared out. However, they did find something disturbing, a hidden cellar containing more personal items and, grimly, human remains. It appeared I had stumbled upon a serial killer's lair. "You're lucky to be alive," the detective said, a grave look in his eyes. "We've been tracking this guy for years. Goes by the name of Leonard Grimes, former military, dishonorably discharged. He's been operating off the grid." "Leonard Grimes," I echoed, the name sending a chill down my spine. "Why hasn't he been caught yet?" "He's meticulous and moves frequently. You got closer than anyone ever has." As unsettling as it was, knowing his identity didn't bring much comfort. Grimes was still out there. A few days later, I received a package at my apartment. There was no return address. Hesitant, I opened it to find my missing flashlight and a note that read, "You left this behind." I reported it to the police, but there were no prints, no leads. It was a taunt, a reminder that he hadn't forgotten about me. I've never been a superstitious man. Ghosts, spirits, curses, all of it felt like nonsense. My wife, Sarah, was the opposite. She loved all that mystical, spiritual stuff. She'd go on and on about how some places had energies or how she could feel something otherworldly when we'd visit a new place. I used to tease her for it. I didn't mean anything by it. I just never took it seriously. Now, I wish I had. It's been almost a year since Sarah died. I still don't know how to talk about it. I don't talk about it, really. I just packed up the RV one day and decided to drive to get away from everything. Her voice, her smile, the way she used to look at me when I'd roll my eyes at her hippie nonsense. It was all too much to deal with, so I left. I wasn't running from her memory exactly. More like I was trying to outrun the guilt that came with it. Sarah always wanted to visit the desert, especially the Navajo Nation. She said Monument Valley was one of the most spiritual places in the world. I never took her. Work got in the way, or my cynicism did. Either way, it never happened. And now, with nothing but miles of empty road ahead of me, I found myself driving right into that part of the world. Maybe it was my way of making up for it. The landscape around me was beautiful in an eerie, desolate way. Massive red rocks rising out of the desert, mesas silhouetted against the setting sun. The kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant. I parked the RV in a remote spot off an unmarked dirt road. No other campers around, just the endless stretch of desert and the towering rock formations in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful even. I thought maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I stepped out and walked a bit around the RV, taking in the silence. The air was cool, the sky already darkening with the stars beginning to shimmer into view. Sarah would have loved it. As I sat by the small campfire I'd built, poking at the flames, I thought I heard something in the distance. A howl, maybe. Coyotes. I figured it was nothing unusual in a place like this, but the sound was strange, more like a scream than an animal call. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. Still, it gnawed at me. Something about the isolation felt different tonight, heavier. I tried to shake the feeling and headed back into the RV. I locked the door out of habit, but deep down I knew a lock wouldn't help me feel safe. Not tonight. The first sign that something wasn't right came early the next morning. I'd been outside sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the desert when I noticed the tracks. Big, too big to be a coyote. Canine-like, sure, but the prints were deeper, more defined, and there were too many of them. They were circling the RV in a wide arc. I crouched down to get a closer look. The spacing was wrong, like whatever had made them had a stride far longer than any normal animal. I shook my head. Probably a wolf, I reasoned, even though they weren't supposed to roam this part of the desert. Or maybe a large dog from a nearby ranch. Either way, I wasn't about to get spooked over some tracks. I spent the day hiking, taking in the massive rock formations and the endless red sands. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, but I ignored it. I refused to let my mind play tricks on me. This was supposed to be my reset, my chance to process everything and finally move on. But that night, as the firelight flickered in front of me, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The coyotes started up again, at least I assumed they were coyotes, but the howls were different this time. Longer, more drawn out, closer. I told myself it was nothing. Tried to focus on the crackling fire, but the unease crept in anyway. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the ridge not far from the RV. A figure, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like it didn't quite know how to walk. I blinked, and it was gone. Swallowed by the shadows. My heart raced. I stood trying to peer into the darkness, but there was nothing out there. Just empty desert. The howl stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I doused the fire quickly and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, a grown man terrified by shadows in the night. I was just exhausted, that was all. Grief and exhaustion made you see things that weren't there. I repeated that to myself as I crawled into bed, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. The next morning, I found more tracks. This time, they weren't just around the RV, they led right up to the windows, pressed deep into the sand, circling the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. I stared at them, unease curdling in my stomach. These prints were bigger than the ones from yesterday. Deeper, too. Something was out here. Something that was getting bolder. I decided to leave. That morning, I packed up my things, double-checked the tires on the RV, and set the GPS for the nearest town. But as soon as I hit the ignition, the engine sputtered. It wouldn't start. "Come on, not now," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I went outside to check the engine, hoping it was something simple, but when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. There was no reason for the RV to stall like this. Yet, there I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal and no way to leave. As the day wore on, that strange feeling of being watched never left. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd catch sight of that figure again, but the desert was still dead quiet. That night, it came closer. I heard it long before I saw it. Footsteps outside the RV, soft at first, but growing heavier, more deliberate. Something was walking around, pacing as if deciding what to do next. I stayed perfectly still inside, listening as the footsteps circled the RV, stopping near the windows. Then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was a branch scraping against the side of the RV, but the sound was too methodical. It came in short bursts, like claws dragging across metal, testing the strength of the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window, slowly pulling back the curtain just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. There, outside in the dark, was the figure I had seen on the ridge. But it was clearer now, standing in the moonlight, just feet from the RV. It wasn't human. At least not anymore. It looked like a man, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and it was shifting, contorting, flickering between the face of a man and that of a coyote. It stopped scratching and turned toward the window as if it could sense me watching. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, locked onto mine for a moment. Time seemed to freeze. Then it bared its teeth in a sickening grin. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out, had to run. But as soon as my hand reached for the latch, I heard it. "Mark," I froze. "Mark, it's me." The voice, it was Sarah's, soft, familiar, and filled with the love I hadn't heard in almost a year. I turned slowly, staring at the window. The figure outside had disappeared, but the voice lingered, echoing in the night. "Mark, come outside, please." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Sarah was gone. She was gone. But the voice, it sounded so real. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mark, come to me." I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the scratching returned, more violent this time, as if the creature was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't open the door. I didn't go outside. The next morning, everything was quiet. No scratches, no footsteps, no voice. I stepped outside, and the desert was calm again. The tracks erased by the wind. The RV started without a hitch. I drove away from Monument Valley, leaving the cursed land behind. But the memory of that night, the voice of my wife, the creature in the dark, has followed me ever since. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now should never be disturbed. My name is Charlotte Lane, and I was 25 when this happened. It was the summer of 2020, and I was in Greenbrier Valley, West Virginia, filming a documentary on Appalachian folklore. I thought I knew what I was getting into, some spooky local history, beautiful landscapes, and maybe a few nervous laughs with my friends. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It all started with Elliot, my best friend since college. Elliot's a big guy with a soft heart and an even softer spot for ghost stories. He's the one who got me into the supernatural in the first place, which is how we ended up planning this trip to the abandoned Greenbrier ghost tracks. He called it the perfect setting for my project. Elliot's girlfriend, Marcy, wasn't so enthusiastic. She's sarcastic to the bone and has a knack for poking holes in everyone's plans. Haunted train tracks? Really? She scoffed when we pitched it. What's next? A seance in the Walmart parking lot. Still, she came along, probably because she didn't trust us to survive a weekend in the woods without her. Dan and Ruby rounded out the group. Dan's the life of the party, always cracking jokes and pushing boundaries, while Ruby's quiet, but she notices everything. I've known her for years, and she has the sixth sense about people and places. It was Ruby who first warned us that something felt off. We got to the tracks late that afternoon. The forest was thick and green, the air heavy with humidity. The tracks were almost invisible beneath layers of moss and tangled weeds. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd miss them entirely. But the locals hadn't forgotten. They called them the ghost tracks because of the Iron Witch, a spirit said to haunt the area. Legend had it she'd been accused of witchcraft and hanged near the tracks in the 1800s. Before she died, she cursed the town, vowing to haunt anyone who trespassed on her land. The legend didn't scare me. It fascinated me. "We're filming history," I said, adjusting my camera as we set up camp. The clearing wasn't ideal. Dan's tent had a broken pole, and Marcy realized she'd forgotten extra flashlight batteries, but it would do. By the time we got a fire going, the sun was dipping below the trees, painting the sky a deep orange. The first sign of trouble came after dinner. We were sitting around the fire, laughing at one of Dan's ridiculous impressions when the forest went silent. Not gradually, like you'd expect when animals settle in for the night, but all at once, like someone had hit a switch. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. Ruby was the first to speak. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Dan grinned. "The sweet, sweet vibe of nature?" Ruby didn't laugh. "Something's wrong," she said. "We're not supposed to be here." Marcy rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. It's just the woods at night. Stop trying to scare us." But I felt it too, that heavy, oppressive stillness. I tried to brush it off as nerves. I mean, I was the one who dragged us all out here, right? If anyone needed to stay rational, it was me. The second sign came a little after midnight. We were settling into our tents when we heard it, a low, rhythmic hum, faint but distinct, like the sound of an old train engine in the distance. Dan poked his head out of his tent, grinning. "Is that your ghost train, Jess?" "Probably just the wind," I said, though my voice sounded thin even to me. "Yeah, right. When does wind go chugga-chugga-choo-choo?" Marcy muttered. Ruby sat bolt upright, clutching her sleeping bag. "It's not wind," she whispered. "It's her." I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to that sound. It got louder and louder, like the train was barreling straight toward us. And then it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. I scrambled out of my tent, flashlight in hand, and found the others already outside. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the clearing. "What the hell was that?" Elliot asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, "but we should stay together." Ruby was the first to notice the scratches on the trees. They were deep, jagged marks, like something or someone had taken a blade to the bark. The scratches formed strange symbols, almost like runes. I filmed them, though my hands were trembling so badly the footage probably came out useless. "This is messed up," Marcy said, backing away. "We need to leave. Now." Dan laughed nervously. "What? And missed the big ghost reveal?" "Come on, Marcy, it's just some local pranksters messing with us." But Ruby shook her head. "No one's been here in years," she said. "This isn't a prank." The third sign came when Marcy disappeared. She'd stormed off after another argument with Elias, saying she needed some space. We waited, calling her name, but she didn't come back. Finally, Elias and I grabbed our flashlights and went looking for her, leaving Ruby and Dan by the fire. We found her an hour later, stumbling out of the trees. Her arms were scratched and bleeding, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Marcy, what happened?" I asked, rushing to her side. She looked at me, trembling. "I heard you," she said, "calling me. But it wasn't you. It wasn't you." Back at camp, things went from bad to worse. Dan tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about camping with Casper, but even he couldn't hide how scared he was. Ruby sat by the fire, staring into the flames, muttering something under her breath. "What's she doing?" I whispered to Elias. "Praying, I think," he said. "Her grandmother told her about this place. Said it was cursed." The attack came just before dawn. We were packing up, ready to leave, when the forest exploded with noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, something heavy crashing through the underbrush. And then it hit Dan. I don't know how to describe it. One moment, he was standing there, cracking a joke. The next, he was flying backwards, slamming into a tree with a sickening crack. He screamed, clutching his leg, which was bent at an unnatural angle. "Get him up!" I yelled. But the thing, whatever it was, wasn't done. It circled us, its shadow flickering in the firelight. I caught glimpses of it. Long limbs, pale skin stretched tight over bones, and a face. God, that face. It wasn't human. Ruby saved us. She grabbed a knife from her bag, slicing her palm and letting her blood drip onto the ground. She chanted something in a language I didn't understand, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The thing stopped, its head tilted, like it was listening. Then it vanished. We carried Dan out of the woods, Marcy supporting one side of him, Elias and I taking the other. Ruby led the way, her bloody hand pressed to her chest. We didn't stop until we reached the road. Days later, I reviewed the footage. Most of it was unusable, shaky shots, too dark to see anything. But there was one clip that made my blood run cold. It showed me, standing by the fire, filming the group, and behind me, in the shadows, was the figure. It was watching us. I haven't been back to Greenbrier since. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that hum again, the sound of a train that doesn't exist. And I wonder if the Iron Witch is still out there, waiting for her next trespassers. My name is Benjamin Morgan, and I was 20 when this happened. It was late August 2023, and I had parked my RV in a remote section of Holly River State Park in West Virginia. I was there to film another episode for my YouTube channel, Trail Tales with Dylan. You see, I'd quit my corporate job a year earlier and started traveling solo, documenting my adventures. The views paid for the gas, and the quiet helped me forget the life I'd left behind. That's what I told myself anyway. But what happened in Holly River, I'll never forget it, no matter how hard I try. I arrived just before noon. Holly River was breathtaking, with towering trees and streams that glimmered like silver veins in the sunlight. The air smelled clean and earthy, like a promise of peace. I pulled my RV into a spot deep in the park, far from the other campers. I wanted solitude, for the footage and, honestly, for myself. The site was perfect, tucked against a hollow surrounded by a thicket of ancient oaks. The moment I stepped out, I felt the stillness, a quiet so deep it pressed against my eardrums. I brushed it off as the charm of being away from civilization. While scouting for shots, I found something strange, a pile of stones near the base of a tree, half covered in moss. Among them was an old scuffed shoe. It was tiny, like it belonged to a child, and the leather was cracked with age. It gave me a weird chill, but I pocketed it for the sake of storytelling. Every mystery needs an artifact, I joked into the camera. I set up my gear, filmed some establishing shots, and cooked a simple dinner. The first night was calm, even peaceful, until it wasn't. I woke up to laughter. At first I thought it was part of a dream, a high-pitched giggle, the kind of sound kids make when they're playing tag. But it didn't stop. It danced outside my RV, faint and teasing. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, expecting to see campers or maybe a group of teenagers messing around. There was no one, just trees and shadows. "Hello?" I called. My voice echoed back at me. The laughter stopped and the silence rushed in like a weight. The forest didn't feel serene anymore. It felt like it was holding its breath. I shook it off and went back to bed, telling myself it was just my imagination. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt near my RV. They were small, like those of a child, but there were no campsites nearby. The tracks led to the hollow and disappeared. I filmed them for my channel, cracking a nervous joke about ghost kids. The rest of the day felt off. My drone crashed during a flight, even though the conditions were perfect. My camera shut off mid-recording, and my backup batteries drained faster than they should have. And there was this feeling like I was being watched. I kept turning around, expecting to see someone, but the forest was empty. I started editing footage that evening, hoping the work would calm me down. That's when I noticed it. In one of the clips, as I panned across the hollow, a shadow darted between the trees. It was small, childlike. My stomach dropped. I rewound and watched again. The shadow was there, just for a second, but it was enough to make me lock my RV door before I went to bed. The second night was worse. It started with the laughter again, but this time it was closer, louder. I stayed inside, listening as it circled the RV. Then came the singing, a soft, eerie lullaby. Just a few notes, repeated over and over. I turned on every light I had, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The singing stopped and I thought it was over, until the knocking. Tap, 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 tap. On the windows, on the door, on the walls. Tiny hands testing, prodding. I froze, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Go away!" I shouted. My voice cracked, weak. The knocking stopped and the silence returned. The next morning, I decided to leave. This was no ordinary park. No harmless ghost story. Something was wrong with this place, but my RV wouldn't start. The engine whined and sputtered, refusing to turn over. Swearing under my breath, I grabbed my backpack and started hiking to the main road. It was only a couple of miles, or so I thought. No matter which trail I took, I ended up back at the hollow. The trees seemed to shift around me, the paths looping in impossible ways. My GPS was useless. It kept blinking, searching for a signal. As the sun dipped lower, I heard it again. The laughter, the singing. It followed me just out of sight until I stumbled back to my campsite, exhausted and panicked. That night I saw them. The children. They came as shadows at first, flickering at the edges of my vision. Then they stepped into the firelight. There were 3 of them, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark voids that seemed to pull the light in. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, ragged dresses, suspenders. One of them pointed at me and they started whispering. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. Then he appeared. The Piper. He was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent at strange angles. His face was shrouded in darkness, but I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and cruel. He raised one long, bony hand and beckoned. The children moved closer, their whispers turning into a song, sweet and haunting. I scrambled back, my hands fumbling for the flashlight, the camera, anything to protect myself. I don't know how I survived that night. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was sheer stupid luck. But I remembered the shoe, the artifact I'd taken. Desperate, I threw into the fire. The flames roared higher, and the children screamed, their voices twisting into something inhuman. The piper lunged toward me, his hand outstretched, but the fire seemed to hold him back. As the shoe burned, the shadows dissolved, and the forest fell silent. The piper was gone. When dawn broke, the RV started without a hitch. I drove away, not caring where I ended up as long as it was far from Holly River. Later, when I reviewed my footage, I found something that chilled me to the bone. In one clip, as I filmed myself walking through the hollow, a figure loomed in the background, a tall, dark shape with unnaturally long limbs. The piper. I deleted the footage. Some things aren't meant to be shared. I don't camp alone anymore. My name is Matthew Turner, and in 2021, I decided to take a solo trip in an RV through Wyoming, stopping off in the Shoshone National Forest, just near the western border of Yellowstone. I'd never done anything like this before. Growing up in the city, camping was just about the farthest thing from normal in my world, but I had some time off I'd been wanting to use, and I thought, why not? Besides, I'd spent the past few years of my life glued to a screen at work. A guy deserves a break, right? So I borrowed my uncle's beat-up RV, threw in some gear, and mapped out my route. I wasn't looking for anything crazy, just a couple of nights in the wilderness, a few hikes, maybe a campfire or two. I had no experience, but I figured I'd take it slow. As I said, I was looking for peace and quiet. I parked the RV at a small, secluded spot just off a side road, miles from any other human being, or so I thought. There was something eerie about the stillness out there, but I brushed it off as city boy jitters. I set up my little campsite and took in the quiet that I'd been craving. For the first couple of hours, it was nice. I grilled up some burgers, drank a couple of beers, and stared up at the clear, star-filled sky. That's when I started to notice things that felt off. It was small stuff at first. I thought I heard crunching sounds coming from the woods around me, the snapping of branches that seemed too loud for a squirrel or deer. I glanced over my shoulder, feeling a bit ridiculous, but I didn't see anything, just the dark, dense forest, still and silent. I tried to shake off the feeling. This was the wilderness. There'd be animals, right? Still, something gnawed at me, a discomfort I couldn't shake. It wasn't long after that when I noticed something even stranger. I'd set my backpack down by the RV earlier in the night, but now it was gone. I searched around, cursing under my breath, thinking maybe I just misplaced it. But there it was, about 10 feet deeper into the woods, almost like someone had deliberately dragged it there. I laughed it off, told myself I was being paranoid, and retrieved it. An hour passed, and then I heard something different. It wasn't the sound of an animal or a broken branch this time. It was a faint, low laugh, like someone was chuckling under their breath just a few feet from me. I froze, my heart pounding as I strained to listen. The laugh was low, unsettling, almost like the person was mocking me. I spun around, flashing my headlamp in all directions, but there was no one there. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was probably scaring myself out here alone in the dark. I went back to the RV and locked the door, pulling the blinds closed, figuring I'd just call it a night and wait for morning. But as I was lying in bed, I heard it again, closer this time. The laugh was soft, but clear. I held my breath, barely daring to move. It sounded as though someone was just outside the RV, right by the door. I stayed as still as I could, telling myself that it was just an animal, maybe a fox or a coyote making weird noises. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, without warning, there was a loud knock on the side of the RV. 3 sharp knocks, like someone was demanding to be let in. I bolted upright, my heart in my throat. I grabbed my phone, realizing it was dead. Great, alone, unarmed, and unable to call for help. Then silence. I stayed motionless, barely daring to breathe, waiting to see if it would happen again. But nothing, just the deafening silence of the forest at night. I eventually convinced myself that I'd imagined it, that maybe a branch had hit the side of the RV. I mean, I was out here in the middle of nowhere. Who would be knocking? I lay back down, but sleep was out of the question. Every sound was amplified 100 times, and I found myself flinching at the slightest rustle. But then, out of nowhere, I heard it again. That same laugh. Closer now, practically right next to my window. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I quietly slipped out of bed and peered through the blinds, but I didn't see anyone. Just the endless stretch of dark trees and shadows that seemed to move in the dim moonlight. I felt ridiculous, like I was in some kind of horror movie. But the fear was real, and it was starting to settle deep in my gut. Just as I was about to turn away, something caught my eye. A figure, barely visible, standing at the edge of the tree line, watching the RV. My breath caught as I stared, trying to make out any details, but it was too dark. All I could see was the shape of a person, tall and thin, unmoving, just watching. I don't know how long I stared. Part of me wanted to throw open the door and scream at him to go away, but another part was too terrified to even move. I thought maybe he'd go away. Maybe he'd realize I'd seen him and just leave. Instead, he took a step forward, then another, slowly making his way toward the RV. I felt panic surge through me. I couldn't tell if he was armed or even if he was real, but he was coming closer, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out. I bolted to the driver's seat, fumbled with the keys, and started the engine. As I did, he broke into a sprint, his figure illuminated for a split second by the headlights. His face was wild, hair matted and greasy, a twisted grin stretched across his face. There was no mistaking it. This guy wasn't just some wanderer. He was coming for me. I slammed the RV into reverse, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. The man pounded on the side of the RV as I backed up, laughing, a sound that was now high-pitched and crazed. I floored it, my heart racing as I sped back down the dirt path that led to the main road. I didn't stop, not until I was miles away, safely parked under the flickering lights of a gas station. I was shaking, trying to calm myself down, but the adrenaline wouldn't let me. I kept thinking about his face, that deranged smile, and the sound of his laugh echoing in my head. It wasn't until the next morning, when I went to the local ranger station, that I learned about him. The rangers told me about a man named Albert H. Haskins, an escaped convict from a nearby facility. He'd been on the run for weeks, hiding in the forest, and there were rumors he'd killed before. They'd found a campsite near where I was parked, littered with the bones of animals, and some that didn't quite look like animals. I left Wyoming that day, and I haven't gone camping since. My name's Samuel Reed, and this all happened back in 2021. I was out camping solo in my RV around a remote spot near Great Basin National Park in Nevada. Now, for anyone who's never been, it's pretty desolate. High desert, dry air, a whole lot of silence. I was drawn to that kind of solitude after a tough year. My wife and I had just split up, and I thought I could clear my head. You know, just me, my RV, and the stars. The RV site was mostly empty, except for an older couple in an Airstream a few down. They seemed nice enough, waving when I pulled in, but not striking up any kind of conversation. The kind of folks who valued quiet. I settled in for the night, made myself some instant noodles, and sat outside with a beer, staring up at a sky so clear I could see the Milky Way. It was supposed to be a break from everything. No stress, no drama. That first night was calm, exactly what I was hoping for. But by the next afternoon, I noticed something odd, a dusty, beaten-up truck parked about a quarter mile down from my RV. Now, people come and go in these remote spots, but usually they park closer to the actual camping grounds. This truck, though, was parked by some shrubs near the edge of a dried-up creek bed. I could see a guy moving around out there. A tall, lanky man, maybe in his 50s, wearing an old cap and a jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in months. He had that kind of build that reminded you of a scarecrow, long and wiry, with clothes hanging off him. At first, I thought he was just another camper, maybe setting up a tent or something. But as the day went on, I noticed he hadn't moved from that spot. No tent, no firewood, nothing. Just him, sitting in his truck or standing around looking in the direction of the RVs every once in a while. Around dusk, I went over to chat with the older couple, figuring they'd noticed the guy too. We made small talk for a bit, then I brought it up. Any idea who that guy is down by the creek? The husband, Jim, raised his eyebrows. Saw him earlier, figured he'd be gone by now. His wife, Linda, shook her head. Folks like that don't usually stay long, too quiet out here. They like the bustle of towns, you know? We all laughed a bit, but something about it still bugged me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just passing through. That night, I locked up the RV tight and kept my phone within reach. By midnight, I was still lying awake, my eyes glued to the ceiling. A noise outside, a quick, heavy thump, pulled me upright. It was faint but distinct. My first thought was that it might be an animal, maybe a coyote since they wander around these parts. But it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, more like someone stepping around clumsily right outside. I lay there, trying not to breathe too loud, listening for anything else. Silence. After a few minutes, I told myself I was imagining things. But just as I started to drift off again, I heard another sound, a scrape like something metal being dragged along the gravel. I peered through the small side window and saw a figure moving past. It was the guy from the truck, and it walking slowly around my RV. His head was down, like he was looking for something. Then he stopped right near my driver's side door, reached into his jacket, and pulled out something long and sharp, maybe a crowbar. Hard to tell in the dark. My heart started pounding. This guy wasn't just lurking. He was up to something. I grabbed my phone and texted Jim. "Guy outside. Looks like trouble. Call cops if I don't answer in 10. Then I did the stupid thing. Classic horror movie stuff. I crept out of bed, tiptoed to the door, and peered through the small window by the handle. He was closer now, just inches from the door. I could see his face clearer in the moonlight, sunken cheeks, patchy stubble, and a grin that stretched a bit too wide. It was that grin that made my skin crawl. He looked like he was enjoying himself. A soft knock sounded on the door, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I swallowed, gripping the door handle without really thinking about it. His voice, low and gravelly, came through the thin metal. "Open up. Just want to talk." I'm not a fighter. Never have been. But something about his tone made me angry more than scared. I knew he wanted to mess with me, to see if he could make me open the door. But I kept my voice steady. "Get lost, man. I'm calling the cops." I thought that might scare him off, but he just chuckled like I'd told a good joke. He rapped on the door again, a little harder. "Come on now. Ain't no one out here but you and me. Ain't nobody coming to help you." I could feel the tension in my grip, knuckles white against the handle. If I'd had a gun, I might have cracked the door open and pointed it at him. But all I had was a flashlight and a multi-tool, not exactly the kind of stuff to defend yourself with. I tried to text Jim again, but as I was typing, the guy must have heard me moving around because he pounded on the door, hard this time. "Open up, ain't got all night." My breath was coming fast, but I knew he could hear me inside. I had to do something, so I shouted as loud as I could, hoping it would wake up Jim or Linda. I said, "Get lost." Silence. For a second, I thought he'd left, but then I heard his footsteps retreat a bit, like he was circling the RV. I ran to the other side, trying to keep track of him through the windows. He was moving back toward the front, right near the driver's side. Then, out of nowhere, he slammed something heavy against the windshield. A rock, maybe. The glass cracked, spider webbing right in the center. I felt a sickening jolt. This guy wasn't going away. He was trying to break in. I fumbled through the cabinets, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. My hands found a tire iron tucked in the back. Not much, but better than nothing. The pounding continued, and he was talking again, muttering to himself. Or to me, I couldn't tell. Snippets of what he was saying drifted in through the cracked window. "You think you can just park out here? Think nobody will see? No one notices, right?" It was like he was accusing me of something, like I'd done something wrong just by being there. Then a scream from outside. "Linda." I scrambled to the door, threw it open, and sprinted to the Airstream, the tire iron in my hand. Jim was out there too, yelling at the guy to get back, but he was between them, blocking them from getting inside their RV. The guy turned, and for the first time I saw what he was holding. Not a crowbar, not a knife. Something else. Jagged, rusty, like an old railroad spike. He lunged. I swung the tire iron, clipping his shoulder. He barely flinched. The rest of that night was chaos. The cops showed up 20 minutes later. The guy was gone. A few days later, they found something else near the creek bed. Bones. Human bones. Scattered. Shallow enough to be uncovered by the wind. I still think about that grin and wonder if someone else, parked out in the middle of nowhere, has seen him too. My name is Amelia Jenkins. I'm 35 years old and I used to be a park ranger before I shifted to city planning. I've always been the type to keep a level head, under pressure. But that weekend in Ocala National Forest changed the way I see the world and myself forever. It's hard to explain what we encountered without sounding insane, but I'll do my best. This happened in April 2012. My girlfriend Emma, two friends Tyler and Kelly, and I decided to take an RV trip into the heart of Ocala. Emma, 30, has always been an avid nature enthusiast, and she had been itching to show us Alexander Springs, where the water is crystal clear and the trails promise adventure. Tyler, 28, my childhood friend, and Kelly, his girlfriend, were tagging along mostly because they loved camping, though Kelly was more into the safety of RV life than the rugged outdoors. Looking back, I wish I had trusted Kelly's unease from the start. We arrived at our campsite around mid-afternoon on a Friday, excited to leave behind the noise of the city. The RV, which I'd borrowed from my brother, was parked in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air smelled fresh, the kind of scent you can only get deep in the woods. We unpacked quickly, tents for Tyler and Kelly, while Emma and I would use the RV. "See? Perfect," Tyler said, slapping me on the back. "We needed this, man. Get the old crew together." Emma was already wandering the edge of the woods with her camera. "The biodiversity here is incredible," she called back, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's so quiet, though." It was quiet, eerily so. Usually, you'd hear birds chirping, insects buzzing, something. Instead, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to being farther out than usual. That first night was uneventful. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told the same dumb stories Tyler and I had been recycling since we were teenagers. Kelly, however, seemed uncomfortable. She kept glancing over her shoulder and leaning closer to Tyler. "What's up?" I asked her. "Nothing," she muttered. It's so dark out here." "It's the woods, Kel," Tyler said with a grin. "It's supposed to be dark." We laughed it off and went to bed. I didn't know it then, but the forest had already started watching us. The next morning, Emma convinced us to hike a nearby trail. She was thrilled to explore, and I figured it'd be good to stretch our legs. Kelly was reluctant, but joined anyway. We hadn't gone far when Emma froze. She pointed at the ground, a single footprint, barefoot and large. But it wasn't just big. The toes were elongated, tipped with what looked like claw marks. "Bear," Tyler guessed. "No," Emma said, crouching. "Bears don't leave prints like this." Kelly took a step back. "Let's just go back. This feels wrong." "Relax," Tyler said, brushing it off. "It's probably some weird hiker. People are strange out here." Emma shot me a glance, her brows knitted. I nodded for her to keep walking. The hike became more unsettling the farther we went. The quieter the woods got, the more the occasional snapping of twigs sounded deliberate, like something was following us. Kelly kept muttering that she wanted to turn around, and even Tyler's usual cockiness began to falter. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By the time we got back to camp, everyone was tense. We decided to stick close to the RV for the evening. As I gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing, I heard Emma calling my name. "Terry!" It was distant, coming from deeper in the woods. I frowned. Emma had been by the fire a minute ago. "Terry, come here!" The voice was louder now, insistent. My gut told me something was off, but curiosity won out. I stepped into the tree line. "Emma?" I called. The voice stopped. I turned back toward camp and nearly collided with Emma herself. "Where were you going?" she asked, breathless. "I heard you," I said, shaken. "You were calling me." Her face went pale. I didn't say anything. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of movement outside the RV, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the pine needles. I nudged Emma awake and whispered for her to stay quiet. Peering through the curtain, I spotted a figure near the fire pit. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, and its posture was bent, as though it had been broken and pieced back together. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I barked. The figure turned to look at me, and I swear it smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a wide, unnatural grin that made my stomach churn. Before I could react, it darted into the woods with an animalistic speed, leaving no trace. The next morning, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV and the smoldering remains of our firewood scattered around. Tyler laughed nervously. "Okay, so someone's messing with us." "Someone," Emma shot back. "You think a person did that?" "It's probably a prank," Tyler insisted. "Locals messing with tourists." Kelly wasn't convinced. This isn't normal, Tyler. That thing last night wasn't human. Emma spoke up. There's a Navajo legend about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that take the form of animals or people to deceive you. They can mimic voices, even faces. This isn't the Southwest, Tyler scoffed. That's a desert legend. Legends travel, Emma snapped, and whatever it is, it's here. The argument spiraled until I stepped in. Enough, we're leaving. Pack up and let's go. As we scrambled to break camp, the forest closed in. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of branches far too close for comfort. Kelly stayed by the RV, clutching her arms as if shielding herself from something unseen. Then we heard it. Tyler's voice calling from the woods. Guys, I found something. Come check it out. We froze. Tyler was right next to me, his face draining of color. Stay here, I said, grabbing a flashlight and stepping into the trees. Tyler followed, despite my protests. The deeper we went, the darker it became. Then we saw it. A figure standing between the pines, its back to us. It looked just like Tyler. Hey, I shouted. The figure turned. Its face, a twisted, grotesque mockery of Tyler's features. Its eyes were too large, its mouth stretched too wide. Before we could react, it let out a guttural, inhuman screech and charged. We bolted back to camp, adrenaline pumping. We're leaving now, I shouted. Everyone piled into the RV as I started the engine. The tires spun in the loose dirt before catching, and we sped down the forest road. But the thing didn't stop. It ran alongside us, its limbs moving in unnatural jerks. Its mouth formed words that weren't quite right. Terry, it mimicked, its voice distorted. Don't leave. Emma screamed as it slammed against the side of the RV, claws screeching against the metal. Tyler grabbed a hatchet from the supplies and swung wildly at the window, shattering the glass and forcing the creature to fall back. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station at the edge of the forest, shaking and covered in scratches from the shattered glass. The ranger took one look at us. Around Alexander Springs? He asked. We nodded. He sighed. You're lucky you made it out. We never talked about that trip again. Tyler and I drifted apart after that, and Kelly refused to camp ever again. Emma became obsessed with the legends and tried to make sense of what we'd seen. As for me, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Some places are wild not because of the animals or terrain, but because something else lives there, something that watches, waits, and hungers. My name is Liam Clinton, and I'm 40 years old. This happened last fall at Spruce Knob, the highest peak in West Virginia. I had just finalized my divorce, packed up my life, and hit the road in an RV that still smells like the dealership. I told myself this trip was about reconnecting with nature, about finding some clarity, but really, I was running from guilt, loneliness, and the wreckage of a life I'd built and then broken. I chose Spruce Knob because it was isolated, and isolation was exactly what I thought I needed. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know about the Devil's Rock. If I had, I'd like to think I would have turned back, but honestly, I don't know if I could have resisted. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun slipping behind the ridge as I parked my RV at a campsite near the summit. The forest here was dense, the spruce trees standing like sentinels in the fading light. I set up a small fire and sat by it, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. That's when I met Eli. He was the kind of man who looked like he belonged in the mountains, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered like an old oak tree. I'd stopped by the trailhead earlier to get a map, and he must have noticed the out-of-state plates on my RV, because he wandered over to introduce himself. "You're new around here," he said, his voice gravely but not unkind. "Just passing through," I replied. We talked for a while, mostly about the trails and the weather. Then, as if it were an afterthought, Eli asked, "You hear about the Devil's Rock yet?" I shook my head, curious despite myself. "It's an old legend," he said, leaning against a tree. "There's a boulder deep in the woods, smooth as glass. They say folks claim if you touch it, you can make a wish, but it always comes at a price." I laughed nervously. "And what's the price?" Eli's eyes darkened. "Depends. Sometimes it's your sanity, sometimes it's worse." I tried to brush it off as campfire talk, but his tone stayed with me long after he walked away. The first night was uneventful, but strange things started happening. The next day, I set out on one of the trails Eli had recommended, hoping to clear my head and maybe snap a few photos. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt. That's when I noticed the trail veering off to the right, unmarked and overgrown. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to follow it. The path twisted through the trees, narrowing until I reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive boulder, smooth and black, its surface glinting faintly in the dim light. Dead trees surrounded it, their branches bare and skeletal. I didn't stay long. There was something about the place that made my skin crawl. That night, the tapping started. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping against the side of the RV. I froze, my heart pounding. It sounded like someone or something was knocking, but when I finally mustered the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. The next morning, I found small handprints in the dirt outside the RV. They were faint but unmistakable, as if left by a child. I shook it off as my imagination, but later that day, I saw her. She was standing just off the trail, a teenage girl with pale skin and long dark hair. She wore a tattered dress that looked like something out of a history book, and her eyes were wide and pleading. "Are you lost?" I called out. She nodded but didn't speak. I stepped toward her, but before I could get close, she turned and darted into the woods. I chased after her, shouting for her to wait, but she disappeared, leaving no trace but a trail of faint footprints leading toward the clearing. When I returned to the RV, the unease I'd been feeling turned into something darker. I couldn't shake the girl's image from my mind, her hollow eyes and the way she seemed to vanish into thin air. That night, I dreamed about the Devil's Rock. In the dream, the girl was sitting on the boulder, her hands resting on its smooth surface. Her voice was soft but insistent. "It can give you what you want." When I woke, I couldn't get her words out of my head. The next morning, I decided to find the boulder again. Again, I don't know what I was expecting. Answers, maybe, or closure. The unmarked trail was easier to find this time, as if it had been waiting for me. The clearing was just as I remembered it, the boulder looming in the center like some ancient monolith. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And then she appeared. The girl stood on the far side of the boulder, her expression vacant. She raised a hand, motioning for me to come closer. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on the boulder and whispered, "It can give you what you want." I hesitated, my heart pounding. The memory of my family, the laughter of my kids, the warmth of my ex-wife's smile flooded my mind. I hadn't seen them in months, and the thought of a second chance was intoxicating. Before I could stop myself, I reached out and touched the rock. At first, nothing happened. I felt a faint vibration beneath my fingers, but that was all. Disappointed, I returned to the RV, trying to convince myself it had been a foolish impulse. But that evening, my phone rang. It was my ex-wife. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should talk." The weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a flicker of hope. I thought the rock had worked, that I'd been given a miracle. But the miracle came with a price. That night, the girl returned. She appeared outside the RV, her face pressed against the window. Her eyes were no longer pleading. They were dark, empty voids that seemed to suck the air from the room. "You made your wish," she whispered. "Now it's time to pay." The lights in the RV flickered, and the shadows inside began to twist and rise. I grabbed a flashlight and stumbled outside, shouting into the darkness, "What do you want from me?" Her voice came from everywhere at once. "It's not me. It's the rock." Desperate, I raced back to the clearing. The forest seemed alive, the trees closing in around me as I ran. When I reached the boulder, it seemed larger, its surface pulsing like a living thing. The girl appeared again, her form shifting and flickering like a glitch in a video. "You can't undo it," she said, her voice echoing, "but you can stop it from taking more." I grabbed a hammer from my pack and swung it at the boulder. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and the girl screamed, her voice merging with the sound of the rock cracking. The boulder split down the middle, a deafening roar echoing through the forest. The girl collapsed, her form dissolving into mist as the air grew still. When I woke the next morning, the clearing was empty. The boulder was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble. I returned to the RV and called my ex-wife, apologizing for everything. Whatever chance we had at reconciliation, I knew it had to come from me, not from some cursed rock. As I drove away from Spruce Knob, I caught a glimpse of the girl in my rearview mirror, standing among the trees. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't angry either. She was just watching. Sometimes the things we want most come at a price too steep to pay, and sometimes we have to let go to move forward. My name is James Nelson, and I'm 40 years old. This happened last summer while I was investigating a viral ghost story at Devil's Backbone in West Virginia. I've spent years debunking hauntings, cryptid sightings, and so-called cursed places. It's what I do for a living, exposing frauds and hoaxes on my YouTube channel, Reality Bites. I never expected Devil's Backbone to be any different. I was wrong. I arrived at the trailhead late in the afternoon, the sunlight painting the jagged cliffs of the ridge in deep orange hues. Devil's Backbone stretched before me, an imposing line of rocky outcroppings and dense forest. The campground was deserted. Just me, my RV, and a few empty fire pits surrounded by overgrown weeds. Perfect for filming. I set up my equipment, cameras, microphones, a drone for aerial shots. I like to have all the angles covered, even if I expected nothing more than crickets and wind. The legend that brought me here was as ridiculous as they come. A group of hikers claimed they'd heard chanting and seen glowing symbols near the ridge. The story had racked up millions of views online, and I figured a straightforward debunking would bring in decent traffic. But something about the ridge unsettled me. It wasn't just the isolation. The cliffs had a presence, like they were watching, waiting. After setting up camp, I hiked up to the ridge for some preliminary footage. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through a forest of twisted, ancient trees. Their gnarled branches formed a canopy that filtered the sunlight into eerie, shifting patterns. About halfway up, I spotted the first symbol. It was carved into the rock, jagged and precise. At first, I thought it was graffiti, but it didn't look modern. No spray paint or amateur scribbles. It was intricate, like something you'd see in a textbook on ancient languages. I snapped a photo and moved on, telling myself it was probably just a prank. As I climbed higher, I started to hear faint humming. It wasn't wind or birds. It was rhythmic, almost like chanting. I paused, holding my breath to listen, but it stopped the moment I tried to pinpoint its direction. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the forest below. I launched my drone, hoping to capture the cliffs from above. The drone whirred into the sky, its camera sending back clear, steady footage of the ridge and surrounding woods. Then, without warning, the feed cut out. I stared at the screen, confused. The drone was still airborne, but its signal was gone. Moments later, it plummeted out of the sky, crashing somewhere in the trees. Frustrated, I made a note to retrieve it in the morning and headed back to camp. As darkness fell, the first few hours of night were uneventful. I sat inside my RV, editing the day's footage and making notes for the next day. Around midnight, I stepped outside to check the cameras I'd placed around the site. That's when I saw the lights. They flickered along the ridge, moving slowly, like lanterns swaying in the wind. I grabbed my binoculars and focused in. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. A figure stood on the edge of the cliff. It was shrouded in shadow, its features indistinct, but it was watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling despite my best effort to stay calm. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it raised an arm and pointed directly at me. I backed into the RV, slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I locked it, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or maybe another camper playing a prank. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found scratches on the RV's exterior. They were deep, parallel grooves, like claw marks running along the side of the vehicle. My stomach churned. I checked my cameras, but the footage was corrupted, static and flickers of distorted images. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I hiked back up the ridge. This time, the symbols were everywhere. They were carved into trees, etched into rocks, even scratched into the dirt. The humming started again, louder and more persistent. I reached the crash site of my drone, but it wasn't there. Instead, I found a backpack. It was torn open, its contents scattered, a water bottle, a map, a trail guide. There was no sign of its owner. As I examined the scene, I felt the air grow colder. A shadow passed over me, and I turned to see the figure from the night before, standing just a few feet away. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, its face shrouded in darkness, except for its eyes, glowing like embers. I ran. Back at camp, I tried to start the RV, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The figure appeared again, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, it stepped closer. "Why are you here?" a voice hissed, low and guttural. I froze, my mind racing. I thought about Vanessa Davis, the historian I'd spoken to before coming here. She'd warned me about the site's history, that a coven of witches had been executed here centuries ago, accused of summoning spirits to protect their land. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll leave. Just let me go." The figure tilted its head as if considering my words. Then it raised a hand, and the symbols around the campsite began to glow, forming a circle of light that trapped me inside. The voice returned, louder this time. "You seek truth where none is welcome. Leave this place or be consumed by it." Desperate, I searched my gear for anything I could use. I found a small bag of salt, an old trick I'd learned for warding off supposed spirits. I poured it around the RV, forming a crude barrier. The figure screamed, a sound that shook the ground beneath me. It lunged at the barrier, but couldn't cross it. "Stay away," I shouted, holding up the salt bag like a shield. The figure retreated, its glowing eyes fixed on me as it faded into the trees. By dawn, the symbols had disappeared and the RV's engine started without issue. I didn't look back as I drove away, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. When I reviewed the footage later, most of it was unusable, blurry, distorted, filled with static. But one clip stood out. It showed the figure standing on the ridge, its glowing eyes staring directly into the camera. I uploaded the video to my channel, knowing it would be dismissed as a hoax. That was fine by me. Some truths aren't meant to be explained. My name is Henry Williams, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in the Dudes Wilderness, West Virginia, during what was supposed to be a peaceful week of camping. I had no idea how quickly my retreat into solitude would turn into something out of a nightmare, one I'm still not entirely sure I escaped. I've been camping for years, usually alone. It started as a way to clear my head after I left firefighting, but it quickly became my way of life. Out here, there's no noise, no reminders of my failures, no people to disappoint. Just me, my RV, and the wild. I'd read about Dolly Sods online, rugged trails, beautiful overlooks, the kind of place where you could truly feel off the grid. That's exactly what I wanted. I parked my RV near a trailhead that wasn't even marked on the maps. The road had been rough, full of potholes and overgrown branches, but I liked that. The harder it was to get there, the fewer people I'd run into. The first couple of days were uneventful. I hiked, gathered firewood, and took in the scenery. The wilderness was hauntingly beautiful. Mist rolling through the trees in the mornings, the sunlight casting golden patterns on the forest floor. But on the third day, things started to shift. I was out for a hike when I heard it for the first time. A faint, high-pitched whistle. At first, I thought it might be a bird, but it wasn't rhythmic, and it didn't seem to come from any particular direction. It would start, then stop abruptly, as if someone or something was toying with me. I tried to ignore it, but the sound followed me all the way back to camp. That night, as I sat by the fire, I heard it again. A long, mournful whistle that seemed closer this time. I shined my flashlight into the woods, but there was nothing there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told myself it was just the wind. The next morning, I decided to venture deeper into the forest. I marked my path carefully, broken branches, small piles of stones so I wouldn't get lost. The weather was strange, with the sky shifting between sunny and overcast, but that wasn't unusual in the mountains. About an hour in, I came across something odd. Carvings on a tree. They were fresh, not the kind of marks that years of growth would stretch and fade. There were symbols, circles, arrows, and stick figures with hollow, featureless faces. I touched the bark, half expecting it to feel hot or cold, but it was just wood. Still, it sent a shiver through me. I kept going, but the forest seemed wrong. The trees were denser here, their branches twisting unnaturally. The ground was covered in moss that felt too soft, like stepping on a sponge. The whistle came again, faint but persistent. It almost sounded like it was calling my name. By the time I turned back, I realized the trail markings I'd made were gone. The broken branches were whole, the piles of stones scattered. I took out my compass, but the needle spun aimlessly. My GPS wouldn't connect either. Panic started to creep in. I'd never been lost like this before. I forced myself to stay calm and retrace my steps as best as I could. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing, and that's when I saw it. The hollow tree. It was massive, its bark blackened and split in places as if it had been struck by lightning. A large opening at its base gaped like a mouth. Around it were more carvings, some etched into the stones that surrounded the tree like sentinels. The air here was different, heavy, charged, as if a storm was about to break. I heard the whistle again, but this time it was followed by a voice. Ethan. I froze. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, but I recognized it instantly. Charlie, my partner from my firefighting days, the man I'd failed to save. No, I whispered, backing away. This wasn't possible. Charlie was dead. I saw him die. But the voice came again, softer this time, tinged with pain. Ethan, why did you leave me? My head swam. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The whistle grew louder, and the shadows around the tree seemed to deepen, pooling like ink. Something stepped out from the hollow. Tall, thin, with impossibly long limbs and a face that wasn't a face. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth an empty void. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its presence was suffocating. My chest tightened, and I felt like I was drowning. The voice continued, but now it wasn't just Charlie. It was my father. My sister. People I hadn't thought about in years. All of them accusing me, asking why I hadn't done more. The figure raised a hand, and the shadows around it shifted, forming shapes, people, but wrong. Their faces were blank, their bodies twisted. They reached for me, their hollow eyes accusing. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in gasps. "Stay away!" I shouted, though my voice sounded small and weak. The entity didn't stop. It stepped closer, and with each step, the memories it projected became sharper, more vivid. The fire that killed Charlie, my father's disappointed face when I quit firefighting, the friends I'd pushed away. It was all too much. I don't know how I made it back to the RV. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me through the forest as the whistle followed, growing fainter but never disappearing. When I finally reached the clearing where the RV was parked, I collapsed against the side, gasping for air. I locked the doors and sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking. I tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. I checked my watch, but the hands weren't moving. Everything felt wrong, as if time itself had stopped. That night, the entity came again. I didn't see it, but I felt its presence, heavy and cold, pressing against the walls of the RV. Shadows moved outside the windows, and the whistle pierced the silence. I tried to block it out, covering my ears, but the voices came anyway, whispering inside my head, "You can't run, Ethan." The next day, I found a journal tucked into the bushes near the RV. It was old, the pages yellowed and brittle, but the writing was clear. It belonged to someone named Daniel, a camper who had been here years ago. His entries started normal enough. Descriptions of hikes, wildlife, the beauty of the wilderness. But as I flipped through, the tone changed. He wrote about the whistle, the carvings, the hollow tree. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. It wants what you regret most. It feeds on it. If you don't give it what it wants, it will take everything. I knew what I had to do. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate idea. I gathered a metal pole, some rope, and a fire starter from the RV. The storm clouds were rolling in, and I hoped I could use the lightning to destroy whatever was tied to the tree. When I returned to the hollow tree, the entity was waiting for me. Its hollow eyes bore into mine, and the shadows wreathed around it like living things. The whistle was deafening now, and the voices screamed in my head. I tied the metal pole to one of the stones near the tree, angling it toward the sky. My hands shook as I worked, but I couldn't stop. The entity didn't try to stop me. It just stood there, watching as if amused by my efforts. When the storm broke, I stood in the clearing, holding my breath. Lightning streaked across the sky, and I prayed it would hit the pole. For a moment, nothing happened, and I thought I'd failed. Then the bolt came. It struck the pole, and the energy surged into the ground, splitting the hollow tree with a deafening crack. The entity let out a scream, high-pitched, inhuman, filled with rage and pain. The shadows dissolved, and the whistle stopped. I stumbled back to the RV, my body trembling, my mind reeling. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, and for the first time in days, the forest felt normal, quiet, still. The engines started on the first try, and I drove away without looking back. I don't know if I destroyed the Hollow Watcher or if I just escaped its grasp, but I do know one thing. I'll never go back to Dolly Sods, and I'll never camp alone again. Some places aren't meant to be explored, no matter how beautiful they seem. Let me know if you'd like additional changes. My name is Ethan Shaw, and I was 35 years old when this happened in October 2021. I'm a freelance writer, mostly covering travel and folklore. I've spent years chasing stories, driving my RV from one place to the next, always seeking inspiration, or maybe just running away. Back then, I thought of myself as independent, untethered, invincible. But Spruce Knob changed that. It was supposed to be a quick trip. I'd heard whispers about a place in West Virginia where strange things happened. Laughing voices in the woods, small footprints appearing where no child had walked in decades. The locals called it the Lost Children of Spruce Knob. The legend was vague, tied to an old settlement that had long since disappeared. A winter storm, children wandering too far, and a tragedy that no one liked to talk about. It was exactly the kind of story my editor loved. I arrived at the campsite just before sunset. The drive had been rough, the winding roads climbing higher and higher into the dense forest. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that settles in your bones. My RV sputtered a bit as I parked, but I didn't think much of it. I was used to minor mechanical issues. The campsite was deserted, just how I liked it. Solitude made it easier to write. I spent the first hour setting up, unpacking my laptop and notes, snapping a few photos of the eerie, misty forest for my article. By the time I lit a small fire, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world bathed in a dusky blue. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint, like the distant hum of the wind. But as I sat by the fire sipping lukewarm coffee, the sound grew clearer. Laughter, high-pitched and playful, like children chasing each other in a game of tag. I froze, the mug halfway to my lips. The nearest town was miles away. Who would bring children all the way out here at night? Hello? I called, my voice shaky. The laughter stopped. I stood, shining my flashlight toward the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but skeletal branches swaying in the wind. I told myself it was my imagination, the product of too many ghost stories and too much caffeine. But as I turned back to the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I found footprints. They were small, barefoot, pressed into the dirt just outside my RV. A trail of them circled the fire pit and wandered toward the trees. My stomach churned. I crouched, running my fingers over one of the prints. It couldn't have been there long. The edges were still sharp, undisturbed by wind or dew. I took a photo, the click of my camera loud in the still morning air. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, straightening. But even as I brushed it off, my pulse quickened. I spent the day exploring, hiking through the dense woods with my notebook in hand. The forest felt oppressive, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every twig snapping underfoot. I found an abandoned cabin about a mile from the campsite, its roof caved in, walls covered in moss and lichen. Inside, I discovered old yellowed pages scattered across the floor. The handwriting was faint, but I could make out enough to piece together the story. The cabin had belonged to a family who'd settled here in the 1800s. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. During a brutal winter, the father sent the children out to gather firewood. A storm rolled in suddenly, and they never came back. Their bodies were never found, and the parents were said to have gone mad with grief. I shivered, hugging my coat tighter. The pages felt heavy in my hands, the words pressing into my mind like a weight. That night, the laughter returned. It started faintly, just like before, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the RV, but then it grew more deliberate. Tap, 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 like small fingers drumming against the window. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden under my blanket, to pretend I didn't hear it. But curiosity is a terrible thing. Slowly, I slid out of bed and crept toward the window. The fog outside was thick, swirling like smoke. But through it, I saw a shape, a small figure standing just beyond the fire pit. My breath caught. It was a little girl, no older than 7, with long hair tangled around her face. Her dress was ragged, her bare feet pale against the damp earth. She stood perfectly still, her head tilted, as if waiting for me to step outside. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. "No," I whispered. "No way." The tapping stopped. When I finally worked up the courage to look again, she was gone. The next morning, my RV wouldn't start. I turned the key over and over, but the engine just coughed and sputtered. The battery was fine, the fuel gauge full. I had no explanation. "Great," I muttered, slamming the steering wheel. Just great. There was no cell service, no way to call for help. I was stranded. Determined to distract myself, I decided to hike back to the cabin. Maybe I could find more of the journal pages, something to help me understand what was happening. But as I neared the cabin, the forest seemed darker, the air colder. I found the doll on the trail. It was old, its fabric faded and torn, one button eye missing. It hadn't been there the day before. I hesitated, staring at it. Something moved in the corner of my vision, a flicker of motion among the trees. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there. "Marlene," a voice whispered. I spun around, my pulse racing. Marlene. It was a child's voice, soft and pleading, coming from deeper in the woods. "Nope," I said again, backing away. But as I turned to leave, the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Help us." I ran. By the time I reached the RV, I was shaking, my rational mind unraveling, every explanation I'd clung to slipping through my fingers. I locked the door and curled up on the bed, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The children didn't wait for nightfall this time. The laughter echoed through the forest, closer and louder than ever. Shadows darted outside the windows, too quick to be seen clearly. The tapping returned, relentless and mocking. And then they came inside. I didn't see them enter, but suddenly they were there. 3 small figures standing at the foot of my bed. Their faces were pale and frostbitten, their eyes wide and hollow. "Why didn't they come back for us?" the little girl asked, her voice like a cold wind. I don't know," I stammered. "They promised," the boy said. "They promised they'd come back." My breath hitched as tears filled my eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They stared at me, their expressions unreadable, and then they were gone. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I gathered firewood and built a small pyre near the cabin. I placed the doll on top, along with an offering of food and a scarf I found in my RV. Lighting the fire, I whispered a prayer, not to any god I knew, but to the lost children. "I hope this helps," I said, my voice cracking. "I hope it guides you home." The air grew still, the forest holding its breath. For a moment, I thought I'd failed, but then the fire flared, a brilliant golden light that chased away the shadows. The fog lifted. The forest seemed quieter, calmer. When I returned to the RV, it started on the first try. I never wrote the article. Some stories aren't meant to be told, and some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. But I left Spruce Knob with a strange sense of peace, as if the children had finally found their way. And maybe in some small way, so had I. My name is Emma Williams, and I'm 40 years old. This happened last October when I decided to camp alone at Smoke Hollow, a remote site near the Greenbrier River in West Virginia. I thought it would be a quiet, picturesque trip, a chance to photograph the eerie beauty of an old settlement long forgotten by time. Instead, I barely made it out alive. The idea came to me while scrolling through an article about abandoned places. Smoke Hollow was once a bustling logging village in the late 1800s, but in the early 1900s its population vanished under mysterious circumstances. All that remained were the ruins of a few homes and a cemetery overgrown with moss and wild ivy. Local legends spoke of ghostly wails echoing through the hollow at night. But I figured those were just stories to scare off tourists. I was drawn to the place because it sounded like the perfect subject for my blog, Forgotten Trails. After my divorce, exploring remote and spooky locations became my therapy. Documenting these places filled the empty hours and gave me purpose. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I welcomed it. At least that's what I told myself. The road to Smoke Hollow was narrow and winding, with ancient trees towering on either side. By the time I arrived at the campground, the late afternoon sun was hidden behind thick gray clouds. The place was deserted, except for a lone park ranger at the check-in station. "First time here?" she asked, smiling. Her name tag read Maya Andrews. "Yeah, heard about it online," I said. Maya nodded. "Beautiful spot, but it can be disorienting. Fog rolls in heavy, and the echoes in the hollow can mess with your sense of direction. Stay on marked paths and you'll be fine." Her words didn't bother me. I'd camped alone before. I smiled, thanked her, and drove to my site near the river. The air was damp and cold, carrying the faint earthy smell of decaying leaves. I parked my RV, set up my gear, and took a short hike to the cemetery before nightfall. The graveyard was small, maybe 20 headstones, most of them cracked or leaning. One in particular caught my eye. A child's grave marked Lillian Reed, 1898-1905. A small lamb was carved into the stone, worn smooth by time. I snapped a few photos, the sky darkening faster than I expected, and headed back to camp. That night, the fog came in thick and fast, pressing against the RV windows like a living thing. I was reviewing my photos when I heard it. A faint, high-pitched wail cutting through the silence. It sounded like a child crying. I froze, my heart thumping. It couldn't be an animal. It was too human. I turned off the lights and peered outside. The fog distorted everything, but I saw no movement. I told myself it was just the wind and tried to go back to editing, but the cry came again, this time closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, sighed, shivering in the cold. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the mist. "Is someone there?" Nothing. Just the river gurgling faintly in the distance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I went back inside, I locked the door and pulled the blinds shut. It was a long time before I fell asleep. The next morning, I found wet handprints on my RV windows, small ones like a child's. My stomach churned. The fog had cleared, leaving the woods damp and muddy, but there were no tracks around the RV, no signs anyone had been there. Shaking off the unease, I decided to head back to the cemetery. It was brighter in the daylight, though the thick canopy still gave the place a shadowy quality. I noticed something I hadn't seen the day before. A journal lying partially buried beneath a toppled tombstone. Curiosity got the better of me. I brushed off the dirt and opened it. The faded handwriting belonged to someone named Eleanor Reed, likely a mother to the child whose grave I'd seen. The entries were ordinary at first, mentioning chores and weather, but they took a darker turn near the end. One passage stuck with me. "Lillian hears them at night, the crying children. I thought she was dreaming, but now I hear them too. We must leave, but the forest won't let us go." My hands trembled as I closed the journal. It was just an old story, I told myself, a grieving mother's imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this place. That night, the crying returned, louder and more insistent. I stayed inside, clutching my flashlight. The sound circled the RV as if whoever or whatever it was wanted me to follow. I fought the urge to look, but then the generator failed, plunging me into complete darkness. I scrambled for my backup lantern, fumbling with the switch. When it flickered to life, I saw them. Small, wet footprints leading from the door to the far corner of the RV. My breath caught. The crying had stopped, replaced by faint, rapid tapping on the windows. "Go away," I whispered, backing into a corner. The tapping grew louder, frantic, then stopped altogether. The silence was worse. I felt trapped, as though the darkness was closing in, suffocating me. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I was exhausted and desperate to leave. But when I stepped outside, I saw deep scratches raked across the RV's exterior. The tires were slashed, the rubber shredded like paper. My heart sank. I was stranded. I decided to hike back to the cemetery, hoping to find a clue in Eleanor's journal or at least distract myself, but the path felt different this time. Unfamiliar. The trees seemed to shift around me, their branches reaching like skeletal hands. I stumbled into the clearing, and my blood ran cold. A figure stood by Lillian's grave. At first, I thought it was a child, but something about its proportions was wrong. Its arms too long, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It turned toward me, and I saw its face, hollow eyes and a wide, dripping grin. Water pooled around its feet, soaking the earth. I couldn't move. It opened its mouth, emitting a guttural, inhuman wail that echoed through the trees. My legs finally obeyed, and I ran, the sound chasing me all the way back to the RV. That night, the entity attacked. It battered the RV, its cries deafening. The windows rattled, the walls creaked. I remembered the journal's warning. The forest won't let us go. But it wasn't the forest. It was this thing, this embodiment of grief and rage. I thought of what Maya had said about echoes. Desperate, I turned on my phone and played a voice recording I'd taken of her advice. Stay near the marked paths. Her calm, human voice cut through the chaos like a beacon. The entity recoiled, its form flickering. I grabbed the journal, clutching it like a talisman, and shouted, "Lillian, stop! You're free!" The wailing stopped. The air grew still. For a moment, I thought it was over, until I heard a soft, wet laugh behind me. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. The RV was abandoned behind me. A passing car picked me up, and I barely managed to explain what had happened. When we passed Smoke Hollow, I saw the figure standing in the fog, its hollow eyes following me. I never went back to Smoke Hollow. The photos I took were strange, blurry, distorted, as though the camera couldn't quite capture the truth. But one image haunts me most. A figure standing by Lillian's grave, its face staring straight into the lens. And I've stopped camping alone. Some silences are meant to stay undisturbed. Here's your passage with corrected spelling. My name is Emily Allen, and I'm 30 years old. This happened along Paint Creek Scenic Trail in West Virginia during a trip I'd planned to reconnect with my art and, frankly, myself. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape from the noise of the world, but instead it became something I still can't fully explain. I had just come off a long relationship that ended in the kind of breakup that leaves you questioning everything. Your choices, your direction, your worth. Art was the only thing that felt steady, so I packed up my RV and hit the road. Paint Creek had come up in my research as a serene, lesser-known spot for nature lovers. I thought it would be the perfect place to spend a few days sketching and painting in solitude. When I arrived, the place was exactly as described. Quiet, secluded, and hauntingly beautiful. The creek meandered through dense woods, its surface catching the sunlight like shards of glass. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the air carried a faint chill that hinted at the coming fall. I parked my RV near an old wooden bridge that crossed the creek. The bridge looked like it belonged in a ghost story, its weathered boards sagging slightly, but I couldn't resist its charm. I set up camp and spent the first day wandering the trails and sketching the landscape. The stillness was almost too perfect, but I chalked it up to being unused to this level of isolation. That night, I sat by the creek working on a watercolor of the bridge. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest around me grew darker and the silence became oppressive. There were no birds, no insects, just the sound of the water trickling over rocks. I tried to focus on my painting, but a strange unease crept over me. It was like the air had shifted, growing heavier, colder, and then I heard it, a faint humming. It was soft at first, almost melodic, but it didn't seem to have a source. It wasn't coming from the creek or the woods. It was just there. I froze, my brush hovering over the paper. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it was a woman's voice humming a tune I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. The humming stopped abruptly, as if I'd startled it. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. I told myself it must have been the wind or some trick of acoustics. I packed up my supplies and hurried back to the RV. The next morning, I woke to find my art supplies scattered across the ground outside the RV. My brushes were snapped in half, my paint spilled and smeared across the dirt. My first thought was that an animal had gotten into them, but there were no paw prints, no signs of disturbance other than the destruction itself. It didn't make sense. I spent the day trying to paint, but something felt off. The colors didn't look right, the lines felt shaky. Frustrated, I decided to take a break and explore more of the area. The old bridge drew me in again, its weathered planks creaking under my boots as I crossed it. The creek below was impossibly still, its surface like a mirror reflecting the gnarled tree overhead. On the far side of the bridge, I noticed something etched into one of the trees. a name and a date carved deep into the bark. Margaret, 1893. The letters were uneven, as if done in haste, but what caught my attention was the feeling that swept over me as I touched the carving. A sudden, overwhelming sadness that didn't feel like my own. That night, the humming returned. I was inside the RV, trying to sketch, when I heard it again, drifting through the stillness. It was louder this time, unmistakable. The sound seemed to seep through the walls, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, my heart pounding. The air was icy, much colder than it had been earlier, and the forest was eerily quiet. The humming led me to the bridge, where the fog had thickened, shrouding the creek in an otherworldly glow. And then I saw her. She stood at the edge of the creek, her back to me. She wore a long dress, the kind you'd see in old photographs, and her hair cascaded down her back in dark waves. She was humming that same mournful tune, the sound weaving through the air like a spell. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. She stopped humming but didn't turn around. I took a hesitant step closer, and as I did, she began to dissolve, her form breaking apart like mist until there was nothing left but the fog. I stood there frozen, unsure if what I'd seen was real or some trick of the light in my overactive imagination. The next day, I decided to drive into town to clear my head. At a small gas station, I struck up a conversation with the attendant, an older man who seemed to know the area well. "You're camping by the bridge, aren't you?" he asked when I mentioned Paint Creek. "Yeah. Why?" He hesitated, then said, "People say it's haunted. They call her the Lady of Paint Creek. Story goes she was abandoned by her husband during a harsh winter. He promised to come back for her, but he never did. She waited by that bridge until she froze to death. Now she haunts the creek, looking for people to join her." I laughed nervously, but his expression remained serious. "I'd avoid that bridge if I were you," he added, "especially at night." That evening, I couldn't stay away. Something about the Lady of Paint Creek drew me in like a moth to a flame. I set up my easel near the bridge, determined to capture her essence in my painting. As the hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, the fog rolled in again and the humming returned. This time it was louder, more insistent. The air around me grew colder, and when I looked up, there she was, standing in the middle of the bridge. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her hollow eyes bore into mine. She didn't move, but the humming turned into words. A whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Stay with me." I backed away, but my foot slipped on the wet grass and I fell. When I looked up, she was gone, but the feeling of her presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. I grabbed my supplies and ran back to the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I dreamed of her. In the dream, I was standing on the bridge, staring down at the icy water. She appeared beside me, her hand cold as she touched my arm. "He left me," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "They all leave." When I woke, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, just beyond the edges of my vision. I knew I had to do something to end this, to break her hold on me. On my final night at Paint Creek, I returned to the bridge with my sketchbook and paints. The fog was thicker than ever, and the cold seeped into my bones. I set up my supplies and began to paint, my hands trembling as I worked. I painted her story, the bridge, the creek, her lonely figure waiting in the snow. As I finished, the humming surrounded me, and she appeared again, this time closer. Her hollow eyes were filled with tears, and she reached out a hand toward the painting. I stepped back, unsure of what to do. "You're remembered now," I said, my voice breaking. "You're not forgotten." She stared at the painting for what felt like an eternity, then dissolved into the mist, her presence lifting like a weight from my chest. The forest grew quiet again, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I left Paint Creek the next morning, the painting tucked safely in the RV. It's one of my best works, but I've never been able to sell it. Something about it feels sacred, like it belongs to her. Even now, I hear her humming in my dreams, but it's softer now, almost peaceful, as if she's finally found rest. And maybe in a way, so have I. The night was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, the kind of night where silence creeps into every corner and the darkness seems heavier than usual. I'd been on the road for weeks, just me and my RV, hopping from one national park to the next, chasing solitude. My name is Warren Kittrell, and this was supposed to be a simple stop, just an overnight stay at a remote campsite tucked deep into the forest of the Olympic Peninsula. November 1995, that's when it happened. I parked the RV in a small clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs. The nearest camper was miles away, and the isolation was exactly what I'd been craving. I lit a fire, cooked some sausages, and cracked open a beer. There's a comfort in the small routines of camping, even in the quietest corners of the world. But as the firelight flickered, I noticed the woods weren't as quiet as they should have been. At first, it was subtle, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot, too rhythmic to be the wind. Then came the faint snapping of branches, distant but deliberate. My first thought was a bear. I'd dealt with them before on trips like this, and while they were intimidating, they weren't the monsters people made them out to be. Still, I kept a flashlight and my hunting knife close, just in case. My rifle was in the RV, but I wasn't planning to need it. The sound circled the camp, slow and deliberate. Whatever it wasn't in any rush, and it wasn't afraid of me. I called out, more annoyed than scared. "All right, knock it off. Whatever you are, just move along." The woods swallowed my voice. No reply. The circling continued, louder now, like the thing wanted me to know it was there. I stood up, gripping the flashlight, and swept the beam into the trees. The light didn't catch anything at first, just endless trunks and undergrowth. But then I saw movement low to the ground. Something darted behind a tree too fast to make out. My pulse quickened. "Hey, go on, get out of here!" My voice sounded braver than I felt. That's when I heard the breathing. It was faint at first, but it was there. A rasping sound, shallow and uneven. It wasn't coming from the direction of the movement. It was closer, almost behind me. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and pointed it toward the sound. Nothing, just the fire crackling. But the breathing continued, a sickly wheeze, and now it was coming from the other side of the clearing. I grabbed the hunting knife and stepped closer to the RV. The circling sounds picked up again, faster this time. I felt cornered, though there wasn't anything visible around me. Whatever it was smarter than a bear. And then I saw it. It stepped into the edge of the firelight, just enough for me to make out its silhouette. The thing stood low to the ground on four limbs, its back arched unnaturally like a giant, emaciated feline. But its face, that wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. The skin was pale, stretched tight over a skull-like head, and the thing had a mouth that split wider than it should, revealing rows of blunt, crooked teeth. Its limbs ended in what looked like jagged, clawed stumps, almost like oversized hands, twisted and deformed. It moved slowly, almost studying me. Its head tilted to the side. That's when I realized it wasn't alone. Another figure emerged from the shadows on my right, then a third to my left. They were all the same malformed creatures, creeping closer, each one letting out faint wheezes. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed toward the RV, knife gripped tightly. I didn't wait for them to get any closer. I bolted into the RV and locked the door. My hands shook as I reached for the rifle above the cabin. The creatures didn't follow me inside immediately. Instead, they circled the RV, their bodies scraping against the metal sides, their claws scratching at the windows. I loaded the rifle and aimed it at the door, the thin wood suddenly feeling like paper between me and those things. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. That was worse. I kept the rifle raised, listening. Nothing. Then the roof dented above me, a loud thunk reverberating through the RV. They were on top. I fired blindly at the ceiling, the gunshot deafening in the small space. Something thudded onto the ground outside, followed by a shriek, a horrible, piercing sound that set my heart racing. I peeked out the window and saw one of the creatures writhing on the ground, a dark liquid oozing from its side. I didn't have time to process it. The others started ramming the RV, the entire vehicle rocking with each hit. They were relentless, and the rifle wasn't enough. I grabbed a flare from my emergency kit and lit it, hoping the bright light would scare them off. I threw it out the door, and for a moment it worked. The creatures hesitated, retreating into the trees, their pale forms barely visible as they blended into the darkness. But they weren't gone. They were just waiting. I used the momentary reprieve to start the RV. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, tearing through the narrow dirt road that led back to the main highway. The creatures chased me, their distorted bodies keeping pace with unnatural speed. One leapt onto the side of the RV, its claws punching through the window. I swerved, smashing it against a tree. It let out another shriek before falling away. I could see the highway ahead, a glimmer of salvation in the distance. Just as I thought I'd made it, the largest of the creatures appeared in the road, blocking my path. Its hunched body looked even more grotesque in the RV's headlights, and it didn't move as I barreled toward it. I didn't slow down. The impact jolted the RV, throwing me forward, but I kept my foot on the gas. I didn't stop until I was miles down the highway, the forest disappearing behind me. When I finally pulled over at a gas station, I stepped out to inspect the damage. The front of the RV was mangled, blood smeared across the grill, but there was no sign of the creature, just dents, scratches, and a shattered windshield. I told the attendant at the station what had happened, but he didn't say much, just stared at me like I was crazy. I didn't care. I drove through the night until I reached the nearest town and didn't stop until the sun rose. The forest may have swallowed those things, but the RV told the story better than I ever could. I never thought my job would endanger my life, but last night proved me wrong in a way I'll never forget. My name's Edwin Granger, and I've been a park ranger in Michigan's Hiawatha National Forest for 12 years. It's a job I love, one that lets me escape the chaos of the city and find peace among towering pines and quiet lakes. That said, last night was anything but peaceful. It was November 1994, the middle of hunting season. The forest was supposed to be alive with the sounds of hunters and wildlife alike, but instead, it felt wrong. The evening started off normal enough. A hiker reported strange noises near 5 Points Ridge. Screams, they said. Not human, but definitely not animal either. I'd heard exaggerated stories from campers before. Things like a moose screaming like a banshee or wolves howling in the wrong key. 9 times out of 10, it's nothing more than an overactive imagination. I was prepared to check it out, reassure the visitor, and call it a day. The sky was a faded gray as I loaded my pack. Flashlight, flare gun, walkie-talkie, and my old hunting knife. My revolver was on my hip. We're trained to carry for bear protection, but in my decade plus as a ranger, I'd never had to draw it in the field. Still, the way the hiker's face had drained of color when he described the noises stuck with me. It wasn't natural, he'd muttered over and over. I reached 5 Points Ridge around 7 p.m. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and a thick mist clung to the ground. The ridge was dense with red pines and birches, their skeletal branches silhouetted against the twilight. I scanned the area with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the fog. All I heard was the crunch of my boots on frost-covered leaves. No screams, no voices, just the quiet hum of the forest. And then, faintly, I heard it. A sound echoed through the trees, a low, almost mechanical screech, like metal grinding against metal. My breath caught. It wasn't a moose, it wasn't a bear. I moved toward the sound, flashlight sweeping left and right, my pulse quickening. The mist seemed thicker now, swallowing the light after just a few feet. I could feel the weight of the forest closing in. A dark shape darted between the trees ahead. My flashlight barely caught it, a blur of movement, fast and unnatural. It was too big to be a person, and whatever it was, it didn't move on 2 legs. I froze, my hand instinctively resting on my revolver. Hello? My voice sounded small, swallowed by the fog. The forest answered with silence. Then the screech came again, closer this time, and I knew something was out there. Something that wasn't supposed to be. I radioed for backup, but all I got was static. Cursing, I pushed deeper into the woods. Every instinct told me to turn back, but protocol demanded I investigate further. Another flash of movement. I followed, my boots crunching against the frozen ground. The trees opened into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. At first glance, it looked like a man crouched over something. But as my flashlight fell on it, I realized this was no man. Its limbs were too long, its back hunched in a grotesque arch. Its skin, or what looked like skin, was pale and mottled, with patches that glistened like raw meat. It was tearing into a deer carcass, its movements jerky and unnatural. I took an involuntary step back, and that's when its head snapped toward me. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, featureless plain where one should have been. Yet somehow, I knew it was staring at me. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice shaking. My revolver was out now, aimed at the thing. It didn't move. Instead, it tilted its head like it was curious, its body still crouched over the mangled deer. My mind raced. Do I shoot? Do I run? Then it stood. It unfolded itself in a way that sent a jolt of pure panic through me. Its arms dangled past its knees, its legs bent unnaturally. It was at least 8 feet tall, towering over me as it took a slow, deliberate step forward. The revolver felt useless in my hand, but I fired anyway. Once, twice. The shots echoed through the forest. The thing flinched but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a shrill, high-pitched wail that made my ears ring and my stomach churn. It charged. I dove to the side as it barreled toward me, its gangly limbs thrashing wildly. I felt a sharp pain as one of its claws, or were they claws, raked across my arm. Blood soaked through my sleeve, but I didn't stop moving. Scrambling to my feet, I fired again. This time, the bullet hit its shoulder and it staggered, letting out another piercing cry. I ran. Branches tore at my face as I crashed through the woods, adrenaline the only thing keeping me going. The creature's wails echoed behind me, each one closer than the last. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead. But I kept running until I saw the glow of my truck's headlights through the trees. I burst into the clearing, fumbling with my keys as I reached the driver's side door. The creature emerged from the woods a second later, its elongated limbs moving with horrifying speed. I fired my last shot. The bullet hit its chest, and this time it fell. But it wasn't dead. It writhed on the ground, its limbs twitching violently. I didn't stick around to see if it would get back up. I threw myself into the truck, gunned the engine, and peeled out of there, gravel flying. In my rearview mirror, I saw the thing drag itself upright, its featureless head tilted toward me as I disappeared down the dirt road. When I got back to the ranger station, I called the sheriff's office. They sent a team out to 5 Points Ridge, but by the time they arrived, the clearing was empty. The deer carcass was gone, but the bloodstains and my spent shell casings were still there. They didn't know what to make of it. Neither did I. This morning, I went back to the ridge with a few colleagues. We found tracks, deep, clawed impressions in the frost. They led deeper into the forest toward the marshlands, but we didn't follow them. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't something we were equipped to handle. I don't know what I saw last night. I don't know if I ever want to know. But I do know one thing. The forest isn't as quiet as I thought it was, and some things are better left undisturbed. My name is Branson Felton, and what I'm about to tell you happened on October 17th, 1987, deep in the Bitterroot National Forest in Montana. For nearly 3 years, I had lived off the grid. Driven by a need to escape the suffocating confines of Little Fork, Minnesota, I sought solace in the untouched wilderness. My life back there had been stifling, predictable, a cycle of routines that left me hollow. So I packed up my meager belongings and headed west, chasing something primal, something genuine. I built a small cabin miles from anyone, or so I thought. My days were simple, hunting, chopping wood, and listening to the crackling static of a shortwave radio at night. That static was oddly comforting, a reminder that I was still tethered to some distant, unknowable world. The solitude suited me. By October of that year, I had memorized every ridge and shadow in those woods, every sound the forest could conjure, or so I believed. The first sign of something amiss was the silence. The forest, once alive with the calls of birds, the rustle of deer, and the occasional bear, had fallen unnaturally still. Days passed without a single sighting. The usual morning chorus faded into an oppressive quiet that gnawed at my nerves. I told myself it was the changing season, hibernation coming early perhaps, but deep down I knew better. Then I found the tracks. They were massive, wolf-like but distorted. The claws dug too deeply into the earth, and the pads stretched unnaturally long. They didn't belong to any animal that should exist in these woods, or anywhere else. I forced myself to dismiss it as an injured bear, some anomaly of nature. Yet, each time I looked at those tracks, the hair on my neck prickled, and a chill settled deep in my bones. That night, the forest revealed its truth. I was tending the fire, its warm light casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls, when I heard it, a scream. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. It was raw, primal, and it cut through the night like a serrated blade. My blood froze. Rifle in hand, I peered into the darkness, the shadows outside seeming to writhe with malicious intent. Minutes passed, heavy with silence, and I convinced myself it was just the wind. It wasn't. The following nights were worse. Scratching at the walls, faint at first, then deliberate probing. The stench of decay seeped through the cabin, pungent and suffocating. When I shone my flashlight, there was nothing but the trembling shadows of trees. Yet I felt its presence. Watching, waiting. Then came the thud on the roof. It jolted me awake, my heart pounding as I grabbed my rifle. The sound came again, a heavy, deliberate weight shifting above me, followed by the scrape of claws on shingles. My breath hitched as I threw open the cabin door, flashlight in hand, its beams slicing through the pitch-black night. At first, I saw only the empty roofline. Then, the beam caught it. A hunched, grotesque figure loomed, its eyes glowing a sickly, malevolent yellow. Its body was twisted, covered in matted fur that clung to an emaciated frame. The gaze it fixed on me was both alien and disturbingly intelligent, filled with a malice that felt personal. My paralysis broke only when it exhaled, a deep, guttural rattle that vibrated through the air. I raised the rifle and fired. The shot roared through the night, and the creature shrieked, a sound so piercing it felt like shards of ice driving into my skull. In one fluid motion, it leapt from the roof, landing with unnatural grace before vanishing into the shadows. The next day, I followed its tracks into the forest, desperate to understand what I was dealing with. The deeper I ventured, the more the woods seemed wrong. Trees bore gouges too high for any bear. Entire trunks were splintered as if something monstrous had passed through. The tracks led to a clearing where a stone structure stood, ancient and half-buried, etched with symbols that seemed to crawl beneath my gaze. A sense of dread rooted me to the spot. That night, the creature returned. This time, it didn't hold back. It circled the cabin, clawing at the walls, rattling the windows. Its breath fogged the glass, and I felt its gaze pierce me, a predator toying with its prey. When I fired through the window, it let out a snarl that shook the cabin. Then it slammed into the walls, the entire structure shuddering under its weight. In desperation, I doused the front porch in gasoline and lit it, the flames roaring to life. For a moment, the creature hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing. Then it lunged, barreling through the fire with horrifying resilience. Flames engulfed its fur, but it pressed on, its focus unyielding. It crashed through the door, filling the cabin with its massive twisted form. I fired shot after shot, each one tearing into its flesh, but it refused to fall. Bloodied and desperate, I grabbed my hunting knife. We collided in a brutal, chaotic struggle. Its claws tore into me, searing pain exploding in my arm. I stabbed wildly, each thrust met with resistance until finally it let out a final bone-rattling scream and collapsed. The stench of burnt flesh filled the air as its smoldering body twitched one last time. Symbols like those on the stone were carved into its skin, glowing faintly before fading. I left the next morning, abandoning the cabin to the forest. I didn't look back, and I never will. Some things are meant to stay buried. I woke up expecting the usual grind, splitting wood, checking traps, finding solace in the solitude that had been my life for 2 years deep in Montana's Bitterroot National Forest. But by nightfall, my cabin lay in ruins, my body bleeding, and the eerie silence of the forest was shattered by a sound that defied nature itself, something neither man nor beast. My name is Edgar Payne, and this happened in February 1986. Back then, I'd left the wreckage of a bitter divorce and a wrecked liver from a life in the city. My cabin, a modest but sturdy structure, sat 10 miles from the nearest dirt road. It was heaven for a man looking to escape, to disappear. Every day was the same rhythm. Hunt, fish, chop wood. Sometimes I'd lose myself in the pure, unforgiving beauty of the wilderness. That morning, though, something was wrong. The air hung heavy, thick with an unnatural weight that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The snow was deeper than usual, and the sky had a sickly, overcast pallor. I tried to shake it off, blaming isolation and the weight of the endless winter. But as I made my rounds to check the snares I'd set the night before, I noticed something off. A trail of prints in the snow, huge, unmistakably grisly-like, but spaced out unnaturally like something walking upright. I followed them, rifle slung over my shoulder, the bitter cold biting through my gloves. The prints wove in and out of the trees, pulling me deeper into the woods. After a mile, they stopped at a clearing. What I found there made my stomach twist. A deer, torn apart, fur, blood, and bones scattered in a grotesque mess. But there was no sign of feeding. It was as though whatever had done this wasn't hunting for food. I turned, uneasy, feeling the weight of eyes on me. Something watching, but the woods were deathly silent. No birds, no wind, just the echo of my own heartbeat in my ears. I quickened my pace, the rifle suddenly too light against my shoulder. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sky had turned black, and the oppressive feeling had only grown. I bolted the door, stoked the fire, and sat down to clean my rifle, a nervous habit more than necessity. I hadn't fired a shot in days, but the routine steadied me, even if only for a moment. Then, just as the first snowflakes began to fall, I heard it. Thud. Low, heavy, like something testing the walls. My first thought was a bear, maybe drawn by the salted venison hanging in the cellar. But then, another thud, higher up near the roof. This wasn't a bear. I grabbed the rifle, pulled the chair to the center of the room with my back to the fire, and waited. The sound came again, this time at the window. A shadow, tall, hunched, wrong. The glass fogged as it leaned in closer. My heart thundered in my chest as I aimed the rifle, my finger trembling. The thing stepped back, and for a moment I thought it was gone. But then, the door rattled. The cabin wasn't built for this. It was meant to keep out wolves, cold, and maybe the occasional curious elk, but not this. The door splintered under a force so immense I shouted, a primal roar of defiance. The door shattered, and it came through. It was no bear, no wolf. It was a nightmare made flesh. Long limbs, twisted and gaunt, ending in claws that could carve through wood. Its fur was patchy, gray, and leathery skin rippling beneath. I fired once, the bullet striking its shoulder, spraying blood across the room. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it made a sound, a deep, rattling growl that made my teeth ache and my skin crawl. It lunged at me, claws swiping through the air where my head had been a moment before. I scrambled back, firing again. The bullet hit its chest with a sickening thud. It dropped, but not for long. It clawed its way back up, its limbs bending in ways no living thing should be able to move. In a panic, I grabbed the red-hot poker from the fire and swung it. It struck the side of its head with a hiss and the foul stench of burning flesh. The thing screamed, a sound so shrill it felt like it was tearing at my insides. I took the chance and bolted for the cellar. I knew it wouldn't be enough to keep it out, but I had to find something with more firepower. I fumbled through the dark, my hands finding the shotgun I'd kept for elk. The lantern flickered as I loaded it, my breathing ragged and shallow. I heard it, scratching. The unmistakable sound of claws tearing through wood. It wouldn't take long. The cellar door splintered, and there it stood, silhouetted in the dim light of the lantern. I fired. The slug tore through its torso, dropping it to the floor with a sickening thud. But it wasn't dead. Its limbs twitched and its jaws snapped. I fired again and again, until it lay still, the body sprawled in a pool of dark, viscous fluid. The cellar was silent, save for my ragged breathing. But I didn't dare linger. I had to make sure there were no others. I climbed back to the cabin, shotgun in hand. It was a wreck. The furniture overturned, the walls gouged with claw marks. Outside, the snow had picked up, covering the blood trail that led back into the woods. I don't know what possessed me to follow it. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe I just needed to know if it had been alone. The trail led me to a cave, hidden behind a thicket of pines. Inside, I found more bones, human bones, fragments of clothing, torn and shredded. There were no signs of others like it, but I didn't stay long. By the time I made it back to the cabin, the storm was in full force. The bodies still lay in the cellar, waiting. 2 days later, when the snowplow came through, I didn't even try to explain. The ranger saw the thing, cursed under his breath, and said they'd send someone from the university to examine it. They never did. They never even came back. It started with a hiss, a sound unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't a snake's sibilance or the hiss of a busted radiator. No, this sound felt alive, deliberate, like it was directed at me. I was parked deep in the Monongahela National Forest, nestled within a grove of towering pines, the RV tucked between their thick trunks. The air was icy for early spring. the kind of cold that crawls under your skin, and the trees whispered to each other in the wind, secrets no human should ever hear. My name is Eli Conner, and this happened to me in 1987 when I was 34, seeking solace after a messy divorce. My RV had become my sanctuary, my escape. As a mechanic, I had the luxury of taking weeks off, disappearing into the wilderness far from the noise of courtrooms and lawyers. Here, there was no judgment, no guilt, just me and the oppressive silence. That night, however, the silence became suffocating. The sun had set hours ago, and the sky was a void, a vast expanse of ink black with no stars, no moon. I had parked near a creek, thinking the gentle rush of water would lull me to sleep, but instead, every sound felt amplified. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, and then that hiss. A sharp, insistent sound that seemed to curl around my ears like smoke. I stood frozen by the window, my hand trembling above the curtain, my heart pounding in my chest. The Remington 870 sat on the counter, loaded with slugs meant for any black bear or coyote foolish enough to approach. But this was not a bear. This was something else, something worse. The hiss came again, closer this time, and my heart seemed to stop in my chest. I grabbed the shotgun, racking it, my breath coming in shallow gasps, then yanked the curtain aside. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, but it found nothing, only trees, shadows, the empty blackness beyond. Yet the sound, that sound, was real. I could feel it crawling under my skin like someone's breath at the back of my neck. "Who's out there?" I called, my voice cracking as it broke the stillness. Nothing. Then a low scraping noise like claws dragging along the side of the RV. I spun, flashlight darting across the aluminum siding. My hands shook violently, heart racing as the beam of light bounced erratically. Nothing. I swallowed hard, forcing my shaking hands to lock the door. "It's just the wind," I told myself. Or an animal. I sat at the dinette, the shotgun resting across my lap. Sleep was a distant dream. The minutes dragged by, each one stretching out like hours. Maybe I nodded off for a second, but the next thing I knew, the RV rocked violently, throwing me to the floor. The shotgun slid out of my reach as the RV tipped again, this time hard enough to rattle the plates in the cabinets. It felt like a freight train had slammed into the side of the RV. I froze, listening, terror clenching my chest, and then that hiss again, longer this time, twisting into a horrific screech. My blood ran cold as I heard it, a wet, heavy breathing coming from the other side of the RV door. I wasn't alone. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and I moved on instinct, slamming the shotgun into my shoulder, aiming at the door. Whatever was out there, it had weight. I could feel it, the ground trembling as it shifted, dragging itself toward me. The door handle rattled. "Back off!" I yelled, my voice a desperate shriek. The jiggling stopped. The silence was almost worse than the sound. Then, with a sickening screech of metal, the door was torn clean off its hinges. I fell backward, the shotgun firing into the ceiling as the door crashed to the ground outside. I barely had time to register the figure standing there, hunched, massive, its silhouette outlined by the flashlight still on the counter. It was 7 feet tall, its body gaunt twisted like a starving wolf walking on 2 legs. Its skin, if it could even be called that, was a sickly, mottled pale, patches of raw pink flesh exposed like wounds that wouldn't heal. But it was its head that made my stomach turn. Too wide, misshapen. Its mouth, it stretched impossibly far, a yawning maw that seemed to pulse with every breath. It stepped into the RV, the floor creaking beneath its weight. I scrambled, desperate to reach the shotgun, but it had slipped too far. The creature cocked its head, studying me with those dark, unblinking eyes, its jaw working like it was chewing on something invisible. In a panic, I grabbed the frying pan from the sink and threw it. It hit the creature's shoulder with a dull thud. It barely flinched. But the distraction was enough. I launched myself for the shotgun, snatching it up just as the creature lunged. The blast was deafening in the cramped space. The slug hit it square in the chest and it screeched, a sound so horrible it almost made my ears bleed. It staggered back, clutching at its torso, but it didn't fall. Instead, blood, or something like blood, splattered across the walls, dark and thick. It charged at me again, faster this time, its claws slashing through the air. I fired twice more, one shot hitting it in the shoulder, the other in the neck. Its claws raked across my arm, the pain searing like acid burning through my flesh. The thing thrashed on the floor, its limbs jerking violently, but it didn't stop. Not yet. I backed toward the door, what was left of it, and stumbled outside. The cold night air barely registered on my skin. My only thought was to get to the truck, the one I towed behind the RV. I could hear it behind me, dragging itself along, its claws scraping the earth like nails on a chalkboard. I reached the truck, threw the door open, and fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life just as the creature slammed into the side of the truck. Its claw punched through the metal like it was paper. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the tires spinning on the loose gravel, but they caught, and the truck lurched forward, dragging the thing with it. For a few yards, it clung to the truck, but it finally let go, tumbling into the ditch with an agonized screech. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest ranger station, 20 miles away. My arm was bleeding badly, the gashes stinging like fire. The ranger on duty, a man named Carl, took one look at me and immediately called for backup. When I explained what happened, he gave me a long, skeptical look. But when we returned to the campsite, his face drained of color. The RV was destroyed. The walls were shredded, clawed to ribbons. The creature's body, now crumpled in the dirt, was a grotesque mess of shotgun wounds. Carl radioed for more help, and when the other rangers arrived, they didn't say much. They covered the thing with a tarp and loaded it into a truck. One of them, an older man, muttered something under his breath about things better left alone. They patched me up and sent me on my way. No explanations, no questions. Just a silent warning to stay far from the deep woods. I don't go camping anymore. Not ever. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels under heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold out. I was deep into the wilderness now, the place I'd picked to spend a week. Just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I'd been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. The solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time I was here to ice fish, maybe snap a few photos for my nature blog, but mostly I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it. The cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop by a small frozen lake I'd scouted on a map. It was miles away from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just how I liked it. I stepped out into the icy air, my breath fogging in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching out into the distance where the trees disappeared into a blur of white. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I grabbed my auger, trudged out onto the ice, and started drilling a hole. The sound of the blade biting into the ice echoed through the stillness, sharp and harsh against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it. A deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, the auger still in my hands, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration like the ice shifting far beneath the surface. I'd heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sound of a lake adjusting to the freeze, but this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost like something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I'd done this 100 times before, and the routine was comforting. But that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out at the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were starting to appear in the clear sky above, bright and distant. Then I saw it. A light, faintly flickering and coming from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moonlight hitting the ice in just the right way. But as I watched, the light moved slow and steady as if something was drifting beneath the surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, faint and regular, like a lantern swaying beneath the ice. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the lake. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment, then dimming again. Always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection of something from the sky. But deep down I knew better. There was no one else out here, no one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing. The light, the sound, something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced back toward the hole I'd drilled the day before. Something was off. There, by the edge of the hole, was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. The crack hadn't been there yesterday. It snaked out in a jagged line, as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the crack, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. I leaned closer, peering into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the cold water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine. But there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth, like it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again, louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice closer than before. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold sweat break out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound, it all pointed to something beneath the ice. Something unnatural. But what? The stories I had heard over the years about strange things beneath the frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice, came flooding back. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, campfire stories to scare the newcomers. But now, standing there in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering more firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake that looked abandoned, but there were fresh footprints in the snow leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing the door open. Inside, I found an older man hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, thick, his beard streaked with gray, and he looked up at me with tired eyes as I stepped in. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice, and I saw a light last night moving beneath the surface. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake, abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there. Ever since, strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't. And that light, it's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV, but as I started the engine, the ground beneath the RV began to tremble. The rumbling was almost deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced out toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading out from the center of the lake. And then, in the distance, the surface of the ice exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I only caught a glimpse, something dark and enormous, sliding beneath the ice again, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But it was enough. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward as I raced away from the lake, the sound of cracking ice echoing behind me. The road was a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I drove, I could still feel it. The weight of something massive beneath the surface, watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, the rumbling stopped. But the memory of that thing beneath the ice stayed with me. I'll never forget it. The way the light pulsed, the way the ice cracked as if it were alive. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried, and whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet. I've never been a superstitious man. Ghosts, spirits, curses, all of it felt like nonsense. My wife, Sarah, was the opposite. She loved all that mystical, spiritual stuff. She would go on and on about how some places had energies or how she could feel something otherworldly when we visited a new place. I used to tease her for it. I didn't mean anything by it. I just never took it seriously. Now, I wish I had. It's been almost a year since Sarah died. I still don't know how to talk about it. I don't talk about it, really. I just packed up the RV one day and decided to drive to get away from everything. Her voice, her smile, the way she used to look at me when I rolled my eyes at her hippie nonsense. It was all too much to deal with, so I left. I wasn't running from her memory exactly, more like I was trying to outrun the guilt that came with it. Sarah always wanted to visit the desert, especially the Navajo Nation. She said Monument Valley was one of the most spiritual places in the world. I never took her. Work got in the way, or my cynicism did. Either way, it never happened. And now, with nothing but miles of empty road ahead of me, I found myself driving right into that part of the world. Maybe it was my way of making up for it. The landscape around me was beautiful in an eerie, desolate way. Massive red rocks rising out of the desert, mesas silhouetted against the setting sun. The kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant. I parked the RV in a remote spot off an unmarked dirt road. No other campers around, just the endless stretch of desert and the towering rock formations in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful even. I thought maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I stepped out and walked a bit around the RV, taking in the silence. The air was cool, the sky already darkening, with the stars beginning to shimmer into view. Sarah would have loved it. As I sat by the small campfire I had built, poking at the flames, I thought I heard something in the distance. A howl, maybe. Coyotes. I figured it was nothing unusual in a place like this, but the sound was strange. More like a scream than an animal call. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. Still, it gnawed at me. Something about the isolation felt different tonight, heavier. I tried to shake the feeling and headed back into the RV. I locked the door out of habit, but deep down I knew a lock wouldn't help me feel safe. Not tonight. The first sign that something wasn't right came early the next morning. I had been outside sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the desert when I noticed the tracks. Big, too big to be a coyote. Canine-like, sure, but the prints were deeper, more defined, and there were too many of them. They were circling the RV in a wide arc. I crouched down to get a closer look. The spacing was wrong, like whatever had made them had a stride far longer than any normal animal. I shook my head. Probably a wolf, I reasoned, even though they weren't supposed to roam this part of the desert, or maybe a large dog from a nearby ranch. Either way, I wasn't about to get spooked over some tracks. I spent the day hiking, taking in the massive rock formations and the endless red sands. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, but I ignored it. I refused to let my mind play tricks on me. This was supposed to be my reset, my chance to process everything and finally move on. But that night, as the firelight flickered in front of me, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The coyotes started up again. At least I assumed they were coyotes, but the howls were different this time. Longer, more drawn out, closer. I told myself it was nothing. I tried to focus on the crackling fire, but the unease crept in anyway. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the ridge not far from the RV. A figure, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait like it didn't quite know how to walk. I blinked and it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. My heart raced. I stood, trying to peer into the darkness, but there was nothing out there. Just empty desert. The howl stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I doused the fire quickly and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, a grown man terrified by shadows in the night. I was just exhausted, that was all. Grief and exhaustion made you see things that weren't there. I repeated that to myself as I crawled into bed, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. The next morning, I found more tracks. This time, they weren't just around the RV. They led right up to the windows, pressed deep into the sand, circling the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. I stared at them, unease curdling in my stomach. These prints were bigger than the ones from yesterday. Deeper, too. Something was out here, something that was getting bolder. I decided to leave. That morning, I packed up my things, double-checked the tires on the RV, and set the GPS for the nearest town. But as soon as I hit the ignition, the engine sputtered. It wouldn't start. "Come on, not now," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I went outside to check the engine, hoping it was something simple, but when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. There was no reason for the RV to stall like this, yet there I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no cell signal and no way to leave. As the day wore on, that strange feeling of being watched never left. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd catch sight of that figure again, but that the desert was still dead quiet. That night it came closer. I heard it long before I saw it. Footsteps outside the RV, soft at first, but growing heavier, more deliberate. Something was walking around, pacing as if deciding what to do next. I stayed perfectly still inside, listening as the footsteps circled the RV, stopping near the windows. Then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was a branch scraping against the side of the RV, but the sound was too methodical. It came in short bursts, like claws dragging across metal, testing the strength of the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window, slowly pulling back the curtain just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. There, outside in the dark, was the figure I had seen on the ridge. But it was clearer now, standing in the moonlight just feet from the RV. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. It looked like a man, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its face, it was shifting, contorting, flickering between the face of a man and that of a coyote. It stopped scratching and turned toward the window, as if it could sense me watching. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, locked onto mine for a moment. Time seemed to freeze. Then it bared its teeth in a sickening grin. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out, had to run. But as soon as my hand reached for the latch, I heard it. "Mark?" I froze. "Mark, it's me." The voice, it was Sarah's. Soft, familiar, and filled with the love I hadn't heard in almost a year. I turned slowly, staring at the window. The figure outside had disappeared, but the voice lingered, echoing in the night. "Mark, come outside, please." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Sarah was gone. She was gone. But the voice, it sounded so real. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mark, come to me." I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the scratching returned. More violent this time, as if the creature was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't open the door. I didn't go outside. The next morning, everything was quiet. No scratches, no footsteps, no voice. I stepped outside, and the desert was calm again. The tracks erased by the wind, the RV started without a hitch. I drove away from Monument Valley, leaving the cursed land behind. But the memory of that night, the voice of my wife, the creature in the dark, has followed me ever since. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now should never be disturbed.